February 1960. It was a Monday evening, and my sister Sarah was following me around after dinner, nagging me about getting a date for Saturday. She already knew who I'd want to ask, but also knew I'd rather stay home than go through the trouble of asking anyone out. "Stop pestering me," I snapped at her. She'd been on my case for weeks about not having a date for the Valentine's Day dance at the VFW hall. For all I knew, she didn't have a date either. The only ones I knew who were sure to have dates were Mom and Dad. They went to every dance, had too much to drink, and always ended up making a spectacle of themselves with their rather suggestive dancing by the end of the night. I really wanted to ask a neighbor girl who always caught my eye, but I figured she was probably being asked by every guy in the county. Julia had it all in my eyes: great smile, fiery red hair, and a figure to match. She always complained about her freckles, but I thought they were some of the sweetest I'd ever seen. Once again, Sarah was in my face. "Call her, you know who I mean. Just ask her to the dance. You're bound to get a yes. You've liked her forever. Everyone talks about you. You're good-looking, smart, well-dressed, you've got a job, and your own car. I'm just glad I get to drive the old one now." I had to use the kitchen phone if I was going to make the call. I could drive over there and ask, but calling was easier though Dad was sitting at the table reading the paper, and Mom was busy baking a cake. Still, we didn't hide anything from each other, so I went ahead and picked up the receiver. I checked to make sure no one was on the party line, and then turned the crank to get the operator. The operator answered. "Number, please?" "I'd like to call the Kennedys, Shirley." Shirley, who was in my class at school and worked at the telephone company 3 nights a week, answered with a laugh. "Is this you, Thomas? Are you going to ask Julia to the dance? I bet she's waiting for you to call. Let me ring them for you." Small towns are full of gossip. There are no secrets when everyone knows each other's business. I'd heard the girls at school talk, and the telephone company was always full of information. Julia's older sister, June, picked up the phone. "Is that you, Harold? I've been waiting for you to call. Hate to disappoint you, June, but this is Thomas Martin. I need to speak with Julia." The Kennedy's house was huge, and there were always kids running around. The easiest way to find someone was to yell, but Mr. Kennedy didn't like that. June, however, didn't think twice and shouted, "Julia, get to the phone. Thomas Martin's calling." I heard Mr. Kennedy mutter in the background, "Why didn't the boy just drive over here? He's got his own car." Someone answered him, but I couldn't make out what was said. Julia's voice said, "Hi, Thomas, it's nice that you called." I was in full terror mode now. Julia. "Yes, Thomas. I'd like to take you to the Valentine dance at the VFW Saturday night. Will you go with me?" There was a long pause before Julia said, "Let me ask Mom and Dad." I heard her address her parents, who were like mine and in the kitchen, probably drinking coffee and chatting like my mom and dad. Julia's voice said, "Daddy wants to know why you didn't drive over here to ask me. He wants to know if you're afraid of him." Mr. Kennedy was someone to be afraid of, as he was a giant of a man. I knew he was a gentle person because none of the kids ever talked about him smacking his wife or any of the kids around. My answer to Julia was, "No, I'm afraid to talk in front of people sometimes. I can do that if you want me to come ask you in person. Do that, and I'll bet he'll let me go, Thomas." This was silly because Julia and I were both seniors at the high school, and most of the girls already had steady boyfriends and considered that the same as being engaged. I probably knew that half the class, if not more, would be married by August. I'm almost surprised he didn't have Julia standing at the courthouse doors with a sign that says, "Marrying age." The Kennedy girls were slow at getting married. June had been out of school since last year, had a town job, but was really engaged with a ring and all to Harold Burlew, who was working his folks' and grandparents' farms. Their wedding was planned for April so that they would beat all the school graduates to the church. I told my dad, "I'm going to the Kennedys to ask Julia to the Valentine dance. Want to go with me to visit?" Dad smiled and said, "I'm good. Say hi to Bev and Clint for us." The weather was mild as it usually was by February, so I didn't even bother with a jean jacket. I sat in my prize procession, a '47 Chevrolet four-door town sedan. It had been Mr. Jungle's car, but his widow couldn't drive when he passed, so I made her a deal that I would keep her garden ready for the seasons and do the heavy chores around the house, as well as drive her to the grocery store a couple of times a month. They had an old Ford pickup too, but that needed to stay in their barn to haul stuff. She had a lot of chickens that she sold for fryers and also sold eggs. I think she had enough money, but it made her feel good to bring in a little extra money for the house. She liked young beef, so she always had a young steer that she butchered at just over a year old, long before most people would. She sold half the meat to the butcher and kept the good parts in her big chest freezer. She would bring me a couple of hamburgers on homemade bread if I worked at her place all day. She loved to dress the burgers up with onions, cheese, pickles, and dripping with catsup. The woman was a sweetheart, but was a very lonely lady. I called every Sunday morning to see if she would go to church with us or me, and she always declined. There were always several widowers at church who would have shown some interest if she had gone. Anyway, I drove over to the Kennedys and parked right under their big yard light, which lit up the whole driveway like it was daytime. I hadn't even stepped out of the car before Julia came running over to greet me. She surprised me with a quick hug. I must have blushed because she laughed and said, "Your face matches my hair. Wait till we get inside. You need to ask me to the dance in front of Mom and Dad." I was willing, if only my nerves would cooperate enough to get the words out. My first challenge was getting past Mrs. Kennedy, Beverly Kennedy, who was an impressive presence, full of energy and kindness. You could easily imagine Julia growing into someone much like her mom over the years. When we stepped into the big farm kitchen, Clint was sitting there with an amused grin, a newspaper folded in his hands like he was just waiting for the show. Bev was busy making bread, shaping the dough and setting it into pans to rise. A bunch of the younger kids wandered in to see what the commotion was about, teasing Julia before Clint herded them back out to the living room, where they kept themselves busy with books and the radio. I was still standing as was Julia, but she had the biggest grin you'll ever see. My mouth and brain had to make a deal to get it out once again. Julia, will you go to the Valentine's Day dance with me this next Saturday?" Right on cue, Julia said, "I'll have to ask my mom and dad." Keep in mind this was right in front of both parents. Big ol' Clint rustled his paper and said, "That ought to be all right as long as you follow some rules." "Oh, now there are rules. You show up here dressed nice. Your car has to be clean and full of gas. I'll check. You two don't go off with any of those town kids. You can go all the way to the junction for something to eat after the dance. No drinking liquor. Come home here and pour out of my jug if you two want to do that. Be sure to watch the time because you have to do chores in the morning, Tom. Stay out of the back seat of that big car and be careful while you're smooching when you get here." Who would believe this guy's rules? Mrs. Kennedy said, "I think my dad said about the same thing to Clint almost 20 years ago. Julia knows all about the rules, so you two have fun and enjoy yourselves. Clint and I don't want any rushed weddings when you graduate." Julia and I blushed, but Mr. and Mrs. Kennedy were smiling at each other while lost in their memories. We walked out to my car, standing face to face. Julia said, "I've been waiting for you to ask me. Mom knew I wanted you to, and she told me that Dad was the same when they started dating. He was too nervous to ask in front of Grandpa, but it worked out, as you can see." Julia stepped closer and kissed me on the cheek. This shy girl wasn't acting shy anymore. She leaned into me, and I could feel the tension between us. She pulled back slightly and asked, "Do you know how to dance?" I hesitated and said, "Not really. My sister and I try to dance to some of Mom's records, and Mom shows us some steps. I'll ask her to teach me more this week, so it looks like we know what we're doing. Either way, we'll have fun." Julia gave me a playful look and said, "If we don't dance well, we can always do something else." I was taken aback for a moment, wondering if she was really saying that. She smiled and added, "We probably shouldn't get carried away, but we make a good team. We've been friends forever. We sit together on the bus every day and always at church. We both work hard, and we know what it takes to get things done. We can handle this, but I'd love to be your partner if we ever did." I kissed Julia once more and sent her inside. I needed a minute to calm myself before starting the car and heading home. It was late, and by the time I got back, Dad had gone to bed, and the kids were probably already upstairs. Mom asked me to grab some milk or coffee and sit with her. She smiled and patted my arm. "You're about to be on your own, making your way in the world, son. It's a big world out there, with plenty of opportunities." My mom smiled and said, "Julia is ready for something you might not have thought about. She's ready for you two to connect like lovers, like husband and wife. She wants to feel that love and feel those emotions. I have to tell you that all those things feel wonderful to a woman, Thomas. I still feel them with your father, but we shouldn't have more kids. We just get those feelings now and know that it's our love that gives us those great goosebumps. Julia's been waiting for you for a lot of years, but you're always busy. She knows you will be a good provider and wants to stake her claim. She's willing to do whatever is necessary to keep you two together. You be careful and know what you should and shouldn't do. There's a lot you can do that won't get her pregnant. I hope her mom has been teaching her." I told my mother, "It shouldn't be all for me. I want to give her pleasure too if she is going to give me pleasure. Can you tell me how to do that?" Mom grinned and said, "Follow me and I'll let your father show you." We spent over an hour with Dad showing me how he pleasures Mom without pushing into her. Mom demonstrated how she makes Dad have those great feelings using her hands and mouth. I used my hand to relieve the pressure 3 times when I finally went to bed. Watching your parents give each other pleasure should be required as part of a life preparation class. I had to drive my car to school on Tuesdays and Thursdays as those were evenings. I worked the telephone company switchboard. I only worked until 10 and then the night person came on. 2 people alternated from 10 p.m. until 6 a.m. every night. The 2-day shift people began at 6 and worked until 3. There were 2 people on weekdays and only 1 on weekend days. My weekend shift was usually from noon to 10 at night, either Saturday or Sunday. Mrs. Blake was going to work the day shift Saturday and Sunday this week because of Valentine's Day and the dance. I wouldn't have to work, but I wouldn't get paid either. Mom made me put on my Sunday suit to make sure I wasn't outgrowing it on Wednesday evening. Everything fit. Sarah had to try the dress Mom had bought at the thrift shop on so that she could take it up in the waist and give it some more room for Sarah's growing chest. I found out that she was going to the dance with one of my classmates. It wasn't unusual for a senior to go out with a junior girl. What was unusual was the senior was a town kid, and Sarah was a farm girl. There was usually catty talk about that kind of arrangement. The senior Sarah was going with had a '55 Oldsmobile that was a very slick car. His family was one of the wealthier families in town. He seemed okay since I knew him around school, but you do look at him different if a guy like that is going to date your sister. He was the son of the local telephone company owner, who was Mrs. Blake's brother, and Morris was Mrs. Blake's nephew. The telephone lines were burning up Thursday night with the kids calling each other to see who was going to the dance with whom, and which girls the others thought would end up pregnant. I heard how the consensus was that Sarah would end up pregnant, but the guy wouldn't be around because he was going to college. I was also surprised that it seemed like the consensus was that Julia would get pregnant and us marrying on Memorial Day. I knew better and felt like a lot of people would be surprised. I even talked to Julia about what I had heard when I drove her home from school on Friday. We agreed that we were not going to let our interest in each other get out of hand. I wondered if I could resist if we were to get that far. I knew I needed some things for Saturday and the Valentine's dance, so I was making excuses to go to town. Dad wanted to ride with me, so the two of us went to the 5 and dime store to get Valentine cards and a couple of those small heart-shaped boxes of chocolates. The grocery store had some fresh flowers, so I got some for Julia and some for Sarah. I made Dad get chocolates for Mom, and I got some for Sarah when I bought Julia's. It was time, and I was dressed in my suit with shined shoes, tie straight, flowers, card, and chocolates ready. Clint and Bev met me upon my arrival at the Kennedy farm, all dressed up and ready to go to one of the big dances of the year. Clint said, "Your dad is coming by to pick us up so we can all ride to the dance together." I tried to remember, and it did seem like the two couples went to the dances together all the time anyway. I was so shocked and fascinated when Julia made her appearance that I just stood in front of her with my mouth open. I finally got out, "You're beautiful, Julia. Here are some flowers to make you even more beautiful, and a card. There's some candy for you to enjoy too." Julia didn't kiss me because she had some bright red lipstick on that may not have been blotted enough. I was okay with that. She wore an emerald green dress with red hearts sewn to the skirt. I couldn't get over that this was a girl who wanted us to get together for the big time. I was smiling as I realized Julia wanted me to be her husband and father of her children. Wow, that was a lot to think about. I escorted Julia out to my car and put her in the passenger seat, where she scooted over to sit next to me. I couldn't get completely behind the wheel when I got in, because of where Julia was sitting. Who cares? Because the car had a column shift and I had a steering wheel knob to make the heavy turns with one hand. We drove slowly, talking about school and the last few months we had left. We talked about going on to college, but it was just talk. We knew that we were destined to be farmers with a city job to help to make ends meet until we had property that was supporting us. I asked Julia, "You're thinking way ahead. Am I being slow to not think the way you do?" Julia said, "I want to get married tomorrow, but I know we need to wait. I want to wait until all those who have to get married get it done. We'll do it later and enjoy each other for a while before we begin making babies." Is this scaring you, Thomas? Sure, but not really. I've always somehow thought we might get together. I guess you did too. We'll make a good couple. The dance was everything the two of us wanted it to be. I checked on Sarah a couple of times, and she seemed okay, but her guy was always gone talking to the bunch of braggarts he hung out with. I danced with my sister, Mom, and Bev, Julia's mom. Dad danced with Sis, Julia, and Bev, while Clint danced with all the girls. The parents decided to go there too when I said I thought Julia and I would go for some breakfast at the junction. We couldn't find Sarah, so Julia, June, Bev, and Mom went on the hunt inside, while Dad, Clint, Harold, and I went around looking in the cars in the parking area. We heard a muffled scream toward the edge of the parking area and went that way fast. Morris Betterman, the guy Sarah went to the dance with, was standing over her face with his pecker out of his pants jerking on it. 2 guys were holding her arms and 2 guys were holding her legs. Jimmy Crown was trying to get her pink panties off her for a 6th guy, John Mosley, who was standing there stroking his hard-on to stab her. The sight of what was happening was enough to turn 4 farmers into a very enraged group. Clint grabbed 2 of the guys and slammed them together. I hit Sarah's date so hard that I broke a finger, but he lost most of his upper teeth, along with a broken nose. Dad and Harold accounted for the other 3. We were standing over the boys when the county sheriff rolled up and began hollering that we men were beating up on 6 of the bigger high school boys. Dad pointed to Sarah, whose dress was torn and one of her eyes was swollen, and asked, So these boys who were going to assault Sarah don't have to stand for what they did? Oh, shit, the chief said, as he herded the 6 big boys into the back of his Ford police car. Dad warned the chief, "Don't let those boys go, because I want them charged with assault and attempted assault." Mom, Bev, June, and Julia came out to the parking lot and saw what was happening about this time. Mom wanted to use the chief's gun to even the score for Sarah. The chief left with the boys in his car when the yelling stopped, and Mom, Dad, Clint, and Bev were ready to take Sarah home. I looked at Sarah and realized she could repair her dress enough to go eat, and asked, "Come on, everyone. Let's go to the junction for breakfast, and then get home at a reasonable hour." That's what we did. We all had a great breakfast with a lot of laughter and happy talk. Sarah was over her scare, thankful that the problem didn't get more out of hand before Dad and the rest of us found her. Julia and I took Sarah home, and then I took Julia toward her house. We stopped at the edge of an empty pumpkin and melon field, and sat looking at each other. We kissed for a long while, and then I decided to take Julia home. We parked in her yard, but the big light wasn't on. We began kissing again and did a lot of whispering of what we might want to do. Our holding each other and kissing put us to sleep. The two of us were wrapped in each other's arms when Mr. and Mrs. Kennedy knocked on the side window. Julia and I woke with a start, blushing although our clothes were all where they should be. Julia got out of the car, and Clint shook my hand when I got out. Bev hugged me, and Julia came back around the car and whispered, "Today is now the 14th, so we have all day to enjoy Lover's Day." The 4 of us laughed in anticipation of what we might do on this day. I knew I had to get home for chores and get ready for church. I hurried through doing what had to be done at home and brought a jug of milk in. I called Mrs. Jungles to ask her if I could pick her up for church, but she said her usual piece about the church would crumble if she were to go in. I told her the same thing I always said: I'll hold it up for us to enjoy a prayer, a song, and a sermon. I told Dad that I was going to take my car so I could bring Julia home, and that the 2 of us might go walking after Sunday dinner. Mom told me then that we were having the Kennedys eat with us, so it should be fun. Well, shoot, I wanted Julia and me to have some special time together, but I suppose we would have the rest of our lives for that. We migrated to the big sanctuary to sit in almost pre-assigned seats after Sunday school. I sat next to my sister, who sat next to Mom, who sat next to Dad. Just like every Sunday since the 2 of us were probably 3 years old, Julia sat on my left, next to her dad, with her mother next to him, and then the rest of the Kennedy kids. Nothing had changed since we were 3 because Julia's hand slid into mine as soon as we sat. How did we begin this? Julia was holding my hand and her dad's. I held Julia's and Sarah's hands. It was right then that I realized Julia and I had been meant for each other all our lives. I was the one who had never put it together. We sat like this every Sunday, feeling those things you're supposed to feel in church. My eyes began watering as I listened to the preacher talking about eternal love. I wondered if Dad or the giant Mr. Kennedy had those same feelings. As is typical after the final hymn and prayer, people gathered outside in groups to talk about someone's new baby, a new calf that was born, and how someone who had been sick was. That's when we heard 2 big engines rev and whine, and then tires spinning on gravel. The big Oldsmobile driven by Sarah's date, Morris Betterman, from last night, was fishtailing through the parking lot aimed right at my Chevy. I watched as the bigger car slammed into my car and pushed it into a pickup truck. Another of that group, the son of the Ford dealer, John Mosley, was tearing across the gravel parking area and slammed into the Oldsmobile before smashing the cars into each other. I was standing with my mouth open when someone yelled, "Julia and Sarah are in Thomas's car." That's when I ran to the wreckage of my car. I smelled smoke and tried to pull Julia from the front seat. She was wedged in. I tried to move Sarah, and she was between the front and the back seat. Clint hollered, "Get a chain. We have to pull the cars apart." People were running back and forth to bring something that would help. The preacher held his hand on my shoulder and said a prayer. There was still smoke, but no flames. I leaped onto the wrecked hood of the car and pulled the unbroken glass from the frame. Clint was using all his strength to bend the seat away from Sarah, while Dad and another farmer were carefully removing her from the car. A state police car showed up, and then another and another. They kept asking the parishioners to move their cars so they had room. An ambulance that was an old Cadillac hearse with a couple of firemen in it arrived. The fire trucks arrived, and Julia was barely alive when they loaded her next to Sarah and took off with a state police car leading the way. I had one brief moment with Julia as I said, "I love you. Julia, we'll be together soon." Mom, Dad, Clint, and Bev left for the hospital in one car, and Clint told me, "Get the kids home. The food's at your house, so take all of them there." That's when a state trooper pulled up with the sheriff. I think he didn't want to be any part of law enforcement at that moment. The other boys who had been involved in Sarah's attack were standing together laughing and joking. The sheriff took a trooper with him, and they were able to gather the boys together. You boys are still charged with assault and attempted assault. You are now charged with attacking me and breaking jail." The only comment was, "Like that was so hard." A man came running up to the boys and told them, "Don't say anything." The sheriff finally said, "And now for what you've just done, you are under arrest for the murder of Morris Betterman and John Mosley. You'll be part of that too if Julia Kennedy or Sarah Martin dies. You boys better get on your knees and do some praying. I think we're going to have hanging." The man who had run up to us said, "You can't be serious. The boys were just having a little fun and it got out of hand." There was a lot of loud, discouraging comments from those that heard what the man had said. Billy Joe came with his tow truck and patted me on the shoulder. "That car is done. Do you want anything from it?" I went to the car and found Julia's and Sarah's small purses. There were shoes there too, so I brought them. I had the sickest feeling I've ever had as I carried everything to the Kennedy station wagon. The ride home was very somber with the kids not knowing how to feel. They were all scared that their sister would die. These were farm kids and knew that death was forever. I drove home fighting the tears that wanted to roll down my face. A few did, as I'm sure were also on the kids' faces. The girls all hurried to put dinner on the table once home. Our appetites weren't as good as normal, but the kids were fed. I told the Kennedy kids, "Let's go to your house and let you put regular clothes on. You kids need to stay with us until your folks get here. Make sure you hang your Sunday clothes up." We were on our way back to our house 10 minutes later. I rang the operator on the phone and asked Mrs. Blakes, "Have you heard anything yet? I promise not to bug you, but I have the Kennedy kids at my house, and we want to know how Sarah and Julia are doing." Mrs. Blake said, "I've been getting calls from just about everyone to find out how they all are. I'll call you right away if I hear anything, Thomas." According to the sheriff, the state police took those other 4 boys to Melbourne, where a state jail is. That Jimmy Crown kid, whose father is the big shot lawyer, has been charged with resisting arrest, assault on police officers, attempted escape, and attempted murder of his father. Can you believe that boy could do all that? I can believe it after last night, Mrs. Blakes. June and Harold were with us, and I had June look at my hand that was swollen. She determined I had a broken finger, found a wooden popsicle stick, and wrapped it. Her pulling on the finger and just straightening it out helped the pain. We searched the kitchen drawer for aspirin, and I took 2 when we found them. Dad called about 5 and told me that Sarah is going to recover, but she has a broken arm and leg. Julia is still in really bad shape, but the doctors say she has a chance to recover. She hasn't recovered consciousness yet. We're coming home. I don't think you could get here before they closed for visitors tonight, but take off school tomorrow and come over. You can use our car and drive your mom. She wants to come over in the morning. You know how she hates to drive. Come home, Dad. All the kids are still here. June and Harold are here too. Mom got on the phone and told me to cut up the roast for some sandwiches that will take care of the kids. June helped me and had the food on the table so the kids could eat. I was also hungry by then, but ran out to do the chores before I ate. The cow would have a fit if I didn't milk her near her regular time. The folks all arrived around 6 and sat down to eat. June explained that we didn't eat much for dinner, so that was why so much food was left. Dad said, "We'll go to the city and check to see what the Chevy store has to offer. I don't think we want to go to the Ford store until they get over losing a kid. Your insurance will pay for most of your car, but it was in such good condition they won't pay you what it's worth. The Jungle's old truck is in decent condition, so it can go to the grain elevator and into the city if necessary, Dad." That might be a quick answer. Dad said, "Use your mom's car for now. Sarah isn't going to be driving for 6 weeks or more. You can put it into good shape for when she begins driving again. When do you think Sarah will be home? I'll get her lessons for her so that she won't fall behind. Tell me how you feel about Julia." Bev Kennedy looked at me and said, "We don't know, Thomas. They thought she was going to die, but she's held on. She isn't awake, but she's alive. Can I ride in with you and your mom tomorrow?" "No need to ask, Mrs. Kennedy. Julia and I decided we wanted to get married, but not until next year if we can wait. I think she wants to get married on Valentine's Day." I said this with tears streaming down my face. Clint wrapped his big arm around me and hugged me. No words were necessary. The Kennedys left to go home. Harold and June were still there, and June told Mom to have my hand looked at. It felt pretty good and most of the swelling had gone down. Harold told me, "Grandpa's old Ford is in pretty good condition and he can't drive anymore. It isn't as new looking as your Chevy was, but come look at it. I know he'll give you a good deal to get it out of the barn." I thanked Harold for the lead on a car and walked them to his car. I got back out when I was in bed that night and knelt next to it with my folded hands on the bed. "God, help Julia and my sister. I hope you forgive those 2 boys who are probably on their knees at your gates. Help the others as well, but teach them how to live and respect others. God, please help my Julia and keep her comfortable. Thank you for trying to keep her for me. Amen." I got back into bed just in time for Mom to walk into my room and tell me that what I just did was how I could help Julia. My loving mother hugged me, kissed my forehead, and patted me on the shoulder as she left the room. Monday morning was chores first, then dressing in clean clothes that I would normally wear to school. Mom was ready to go, so we used the family '55 Chevy sedan. We stopped by the Kennedys, and Clint hugged me before telling me, "We're all praying for her. Call if you need me." It was less than 30 miles to the hospital, which was about the same distance as the school buses traveled to take us to school. We parked and went into the hospital where Mom and Julia checked on the two girls' condition. Sarah was probably close to being released to go home, but Julia was still unconscious. We went to see Sarah, and the first thing out of her mouth was, "Did you go see Julia?" She said, "Go. She needs to hear your voice," when I said no. It may not wake her up, but it will make her feel better. Bev and I went to Julia's room, and I was shocked to see how her head was all wrapped up, along with her arms. I wanted to touch her, but couldn't make up my mind where. A nurse came in and recognized my problem and removed the mask that covered her nose and mouth. She smiled at me and nodded. I leaned down to Julia and gently kissed her on the lips. She moaned, which made me almost frantic that I had hurt her. The nurse said, "Let me get the new kind of oxygen input for the nose. You can kiss her if you want it that way." From the sound she made, "I think she wants to wake up to be with you." The nurse was gone a few seconds and returned with something that draped across Julia's ears and set in her nostrils. The nurse assured me she was getting all the oxygen she needed. Julia had tubes and IVs in both arms. She had 2 of them in her right arm. I stood looking at her and remembered how she was crumpled up between the front seat and the center dash. I wondered how either girl lived through the collisions. Why would someone do something so stupid? Why would Morris destroy his precious '55 Oldsmobile 2-door hardtop? I knew it had been his dad's car, but still, it wasn't old and was the ultimate big date car. I thought the same about John Mosley, but he had always been the spoiled brat kid of Mosley Ford. For either of the two to wreck their cars was crazy. While Betterman literally lost his head from the first or second impact, and Mosley was impaled on the steering shaft of his year-old Ford. I sat holding Julia's hand for a long time, trying to project my loving thoughts to her. Bev finally brought me out of my trance and said, "We need to get some lunch. Give her a kiss and tell her you'll be back shortly." We both gave Julia a kiss, but her lips curled into a smile when I kissed her and said, "I love you this time." That gave me hope. We went to a local cafe that probably lived off hospital employees and people with a patient inside. Mom was telling me that the doctor would look at Sarah later today and decide whether or not to send her home. He had previously indicated that he thought she needed to be in the hospital at least another day, maybe 2. I told Mom how Julia had moaned when I kissed her, and then how she smiled when I kissed her again before we left. Bev had found out that Julia probably had a concussion, along with everything else. The doc told Bev that Julia wouldn't have lived if she hadn't been so healthy. Mom and Bev decided we could stay another couple of hours, and we should then go home. Mom said, "You need to figure out what you're going to do about school and work." The last kiss almost brought a smile from Julia once again, as well as a slight squeeze of my hand. I told Julia, "I'll be here tomorrow, and you'll be that much better." We hadn't been home, but for only a couple of minutes when the phone rang. It was Shirley, and she said, "Mrs. Blakes wants to talk to you." When she answered, I said, "Yes, ma'am. You wanted to talk to me." There is no nice way to say this, Tom, but I have to let you go. Morris' dad is insisting on it. He thinks you provoked Morris into doing something so crazy. You would not be let go if it were my decision. Morris' dad was going to take his car away from him the same as the Mosley boy. I guess they thought wrecking them would be payback to their parents for taking them away. I'm sorry, Tom. I heard Morgan over at the grain elevator was looking for a part-timer. Go see him, and I'll make sure you get a good reference. I put the receiver back on the hook and just slid down the wall. How could this be happening? Mom came into the kitchen and asked what the matter was. I gave her the glossed-over details, and then got up to change clothes for chores. I was done in a flash, and then Julia's younger sister, in her 3rd year of high school with Sarah, called and said, "Your teachers all gave me your homework and told me to tell you that you could work from home, but needed to send lessons in every day. You might be able to catch Julia up when she comes out of it. Come over and get your lessons." I drove Mom's car to the Kennedys and was greeted by another cute redhead with lots of freckles. This was Jeannie, or Jeannie the Junior, as I teased her. She always had a comeback that I'm sure she had been thinking about since the last tease. Julia needed me to help her come out of it, and I was determined to be there. I could be doing homework while sitting with her. I was going to save each day's lesson so she could begin where she left off when she did come out of it. I called Mrs. Jungles to see if she needed anything. She said, "Don't you worry about me, Thomas. You go see Julia every day and help her get better. I have a grandson who is capable of helping me now, so he can take over your job. You lost your car anyway. I want you to know something, Thomas. Your family and the Kennedys need to talk to my son in Melbourne. Kenneth is a big-time attorney and can get all the medical bills paid, as well as get your car paid for too. Let me get his office number for you. Make sure your folks and the Kennedys go see him. Who would have guessed Mrs. Jungle's son was a big-time lawyer, just like Jimmy Crown's dad? After hearing about it, I spoke to my father, which led him to visit the Kennedys. They all agreed to contact Kenneth Jungle the next morning and meet at his office. Meanwhile, my plan stayed the same. I would spend the entire day at the hospital. I prayed every night, and each day I saw signs that my prayers were working as Julia slowly improved. I left early in Mom's old car and made it to the hospital just as a nurse's aide was finishing up helping Julia. I quietly backed away and waited nearby, focused only on Julia's recovery and hoping to see her regain her strength. When the aide finished and drew back the curtain, she smiled and said, "Your girlfriend is lucky to have someone who cares so much. Give her a kiss, maybe she'll smile again like yesterday." I took Julia's hand and gently leaned in. As I whispered, "I love you," her eyes fluttered open. She smiled softly, then closed them again. It was the best sign yet. A few minutes later, a doctor checked her reflexes and said, "Keep doing whatever you're doing. It's helping her." Around noon, my parents came to take me to lunch before their meeting with the lawyer. During the meal, I reminded Dad, "Don't forget to mention Jimmy Crown's dad. He's an attorney here in Melbourne too." I returned to Julia's room afterward, stayed by her side, and got through all my reading for 2 classes. Homework would be easier now, but I knew I'd still need help with trigonometry. That was something better learned in person. The folks all came back before 5 and checked Sarah out. Julia's eyes came open and she smiled when I kissed her this time. I leaned down because I thought she was trying to say something. I think I heard "I love you," and then she closed her eyes again. I told Julia, "I have to go home to do chores. I'll be here in the morning." I kissed her again, which brought the smile. I really didn't want to leave her. I didn't know why, but something about leaving was bugging me. I kissed Julia and told her I loved her again before I reluctantly left. The folks were in the Kennedy station wagon coming home from the hospital, so I went straight to the Kennedys to give Jeannie the Jr. my completed homework and to pick up the new assignments. It didn't take me long to do my chores and then sit with Sarah while I told her that doing the classes away from school wasn't bad. She could write notes if she needed some help with math. We hadn't been in bed long when I had the Kennedy ring on the phone. Our phone rang a minute later. I answered, and Clint told me, "You better come with Bev and me. Julia's taken a turn for the worse." It didn't take but a minute to put my clothes on and be outside when Clint came for me. Mom and Dad were standing with me and asked Julia's condition. Bev could only say the doctor wanted them to come in. I prayed hoping Julia would be okay all the way to the hospital. The doctor and a nurse were with her, and both had a concerned look on their faces. They left the room with Mr. and Mrs. Kennedy to talk to them, so I went to Julia and held her hand. There was barely a squeeze. I kissed her and said, "I love you, Julia. You have to get better for our lives to be complete." There was a slight smile, a flutter of the eyelids, and then a large exhale. She didn't inhale, so I looked out of the room as I panicked. I waved at the doctor, and he came in with his stethoscope and listened for her heart. He couldn't give her the new method of CPR because her chest had been crushed so badly. The man stood up and looked at the 3 of us and said, "She was hurt too bad to overcome all the bones that poked her lungs and heart." The 3 of us stood there stunned. I was overcome with anger, but there was no one to take it out on. The 2 boys who were responsible were dead. I wanted to go to the funeral home and beat their faces to a pulp, but they wouldn't feel it. I needed to lash out, but I couldn't. Clint was holding Bev, giving her comfort, and I sat down in the bedside chair and held Julia's hand. It was already cooling. I placed it on the bed and leaned over her to kiss her lips one last time. I whispered, "I love you," while the tears were flowing down my cheeks. Clint said, "Let's go home. Tomorrow might be busy." My loss was my future, but Clint and Bev had lost their second daughter to a senseless act. I needed to pray for them to receive the comfort they needed. Mom and Dad tried to comfort me, but there was no way for me to sleep that night. I paced in my room. I went to the kitchen for a cookie and milk. I went outside and looked up at the stars, and then went back to bed and pulled the covers over my head. I still didn't sleep, but was out doing chores when I should be there. Dad didn't go away from the house all day, although I know he should be checking and fixing fence. I had to gingerly hold Sarah while she cried for her friend. We talked with the Kennedys about how to handle the funeral that night. It was decided that Julia's service would be held at our church on Saturday. Julia was to be buried in the local Deer Park Cemetery. We didn't want any overlap with the 2 boys who were going to be buried Friday. Their funerals would be at the funeral home in Melbourne, and their graves were going to be in Melbourne as well. I went to school with all the homework I owed on Friday. The teachers were all understanding and told me I could ask for additional help if I needed it. You could always ask for additional help, so that wasn't anything different. There wasn't any visitation because Julia had been so badly injured. Saturday was difficult because we all went to church where people expected the Kennedys to sit up front. Sarah was in a wheelchair and was on the outside of the pew we were in. Clint and Bev wanted us to sit the way we usually did, but Julia wasn't there. Jeannie sat holding her dad's hand and slid hers into mine. I almost began crying as it felt like Julia's. I knew I couldn't just shake her hand loose. I had to sit there and think how Julia and I had held hands in this church for 15 years. There must have been the entire town and area in the church. I know almost every kid in our high school was there. I had heard that the two boys whose funerals yesterday hardly had anyone there, especially classmates. I suppose that was punishment for the parents. The preacher said the graveside prayer was for the living and to also pray for God to welcome Julia to his kingdom. I stayed there a long time talking to Julia, or to no one actually. The cemetery workers filled the grave in, set the small stone, and left. I realized I needed to do chores when the sky became dusk. Dad had already done my chores, so I changed to regular clothes and ate with Mom, Dad, and Sarah. Sarah asked, "Can you take me to school so I can attend class? I can continue to do this from home, but I'd do better if I was there. I'm not as smart as you in math. You can still help me with homework, but I want to go to class." "Sure, Sarah. I don't work at the telephone company any longer, so I can do it." Sunday found the two families sitting in our usual seats, except that Jeannie was sitting between Clint and me. She slid her hand into mine once again and asked me, "Do this with me, Thomas. It makes me feel closer to Julia." "What do you say to that?" School was easy, Sarah did well, and continued when she began to walk again. Her arm had healed, and the small scars she had on her face were almost gone. Graduation found the usual fairly high percentage of female graduates with baby bumps. The church was booked for weddings from Memorial Day until July 4th. I went to some and neglected some others. I know I heard how Morris Betterman, Sr. was in the hospital for wrecking his car while drunk. I suppose it was similar to Julia's injuries, and he died. Mrs. Blake called a week after Mr. Betterman's funeral and asked me if I wanted my job back. I told her that I was helping Dad on the farm since I was out of school and working at the grain elevator about 30 hours a week during non-harvest periods. Mrs. Blake said the family wanted to offer you the job back because you have been a faithful employee. Come see us if you want a lineman job, Thomas. We miss you being around. Valentine's Day came and went without Sarah bugging me about getting a date. She asked me, and I said, I'll feel like going out with a girl again, but it may be a while. Julia's only been gone a year. I was making good money from the elevator and during harvest. The 60-plus hours a week really piled in the savings. I was finally settling down and not fretting over Julia. She was still in my mind and heart every day, but not as strong. Sarah had graduated and was able to get a town job. Jeannie, who graduated at the same time, wasn't that interested in finding a job in the city. I noticed how she was at our house when I returned home almost daily. Mom said she was learning some of her recipes. Jeannie stayed for supper one evening after a 12-hour day unloading soybeans and corn. I don't remember what it was, but it was good. Mom made the comment that Jeannie had made it all, including the peach pie. That part was easy to remember. I had showered and had clean clothes on when Mom told me to take Jeannie home unless I either want to give up my bed or share it with her. Yeah, sure, share a bed with a Julia and Bev lookalike? I was driving an old pickup I had bought for $100. It didn't have many miles, but the body had definitely seen better days. What could you expect for that price? Jeannie slid over to the center seat as we turned onto her lane. When we stopped, she reached over, turned the key to shut off the engine, and sat looking at me seriously. Finally, she spoke. When are you going to notice me? Julia and I used to talk about you all the time. We shared a room growing up, and we often talked about how much she cared for you. I know this might sound strange, Thomas, but I feel the same way she did. We might look alike, but I want you to see me for who I am, someone who truly cares about you, just like Julia did. She hesitated, then added, Julia used to tell me, take care of Thomas if anything ever happens to me. I know it's a lot to ask, but please think about it. I just want to be there for you. I suppose I had seen this coming in a way. Every Sunday, we'd sit together in church, and our families would often share dinner afterward. I gently took Jeannie's hands and kissed them lightly. I'll try, Jeannie, I said quietly. I care about you too. I just want to make sure we really know each other before moving forward. Talk to my mother, Jeannie said softly. She knows how I felt for a long time. I understand you're busy right now, but just remember I'll be here when you're ready. She smiled, gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, and said playfully, take me home before I get too emotional. I laughed, patted her knee, and quickly got out to open her door properly. I walked her to the front porch and said with a smile, good night. I was dizzy from the intensity of the feelings and emotions Jeannie had put me through. Could I do this? Did I even want to do this? Mom and Dad were still in the kitchen when I came in at home. Dad smiled and asked, did Jeannie put you on the same page as she is? Mom said, don't be crude like your dad. We both want you to have a life of your own, and that little girl has poured her heart out to me for over a year. Think about it, Tom, but don't let your old feelings influence you. I needed some more air, so I went out to my pickup and drove to my comfort place. I parked right next to Julia's grave and thought of those intimate moments we shared. There were too few, but most of that was my doing. I kept asking, will you be hurt if Jeannie and I get together? Will you still bless our home if we have kids? I wish we could talk, but that's not to be. I don't know whether I really like her, but there's time and there is a spark. What I want is some kind of sign that says you're good with this. I know you can't talk to the dead, but they can visit you to tell you things. I could feel her hovering over me to tell me how much she wanted to be with me. It seemed as if she was saying how much she wanted Jeannie to be with me. I needed to get to bed so I would be of value tomorrow. I drove home and was in bed within minutes. I was up and quickly did the chores the next morning. I needed to be at the elevator at 7 and would probably work until 8 with what was supposed to be an hour off for lunch. The only time we got an hour for lunch is if someone brought something. Today I was dumping a pickup full of soybeans when I saw a vision in the distance. A redhead had parked an old Ford coupe out at the beginning of the line for trucks waiting to unload. I could see her asking questions and then driving her car up next to where my pickup was. She had a huge basket that was obviously heavy and was walking toward where there was a cloud of dust from dumping the beans. I hollered at the other man and told him I'd be right back. I ran to Jeannie and told her, we'll knock off for lunch, so go back to your car to stay out of the dust. She did what I asked and I waved to cut the conveyor so we could get a break when we finished that pickup. The three of us stood around the grill where we dumped the grain and stripped the face masks off we used to keep from breathing the dust. I told the guys, let me see if there's enough food for all of us. I know I'm hungry. I waved at the other guys when I checked in the hamper. We settled on the picnic table in the shade under a tree. We ate ravenously, thanking Jeannie the whole time. She had 2 gallons of tea that was cool to wash down the chicken and turkey sandwiches. We finished, and the other 2 men lit cigarettes. I helped Jeannie put the hamper back into the car and asked where she got it. Dad got it for me from Harold's grandfather. It doesn't have a lot of miles, but they must have all been hard miles. It's perfect for running around. If you can believe it, I think it was Moonshiner's car. They usually run good, but are nearly worn out early. Dad said he really didn't give but $25 for it. I'll get the $25 out of it. I told her I wouldn't be home until about 8, and she just nodded. She smiled and said, I'll be waiting. She stabbed at me for a quick kiss with that and drove off down the road. There was a lot of hooting and hollering about smooching on company time. The realism was that we had only stopped the conveyor less than 30 minutes ago. The conveyor was started up, and we positioned the next wagon to lift and dump. There were only 2 trucks left when 8 o'clock came around, so we quickly dumped them. It seemed there were always a couple of farmers who pushed us past 8. I rushed home to clean up. You have to brush your boots and clothes off with a broom so the dust doesn't spill all over the porch. I had my clothes off and into the shower fast enough that I barely had time to say hi to a lot of people in the kitchen. I didn't have time to dawdle as I was starved. Jeannie came in and gathered my filthy clothes while I was putting clean clothes on. She put them into a basket and hauled them out to the washer on the side porch. I guess Mom was getting a helper. I slid into my usual place, and a plate of meatloaf, a pile of mashed potatoes, green beans, and lots of gravy appeared. There were some delicious rolls to soak the gravy up. This was a great treat. The iced tea had ice in it, which always makes it good. Dad and Clint were drinking some dark amber liquid with ice while they watched me stuff myself. Bev and Mom were watching me with smaller glasses of that same liquid. This must be some of Clint's own instead of something he bought. I sat back, rubbing my stomach, knowing how good the meal was. Mom said, you know that Jeannie made that whole meal, including the rolls? Very good, Jeannie. To what do I owe this great pleasure? Jeannie just smiled, but Bev said, I think she's trying to tell you something. You two have been dodging around each other for over a year, and she thinks it's time for something more. Clint said, well, kid, it's like this. It's time to get started when you meet up with someone who obviously is crazy about you, and you're going nuts trying to find the answer. What's it going to take to get you to show some more interest in my little girl? You're holding up progress. June wants to get married, but is waiting until Jeannie gets what she wants. June and Harold will set the date as soon as you two come to an agreement. I know this wasn't entirely true because Harold told me he wanted to finish saving for his own farm to add to the 2 he was working. I don't know how he would have the time for a wife. I was sort of in the same boat. The elevator was working 6 days a week and would on Sundays, but everyone felt we should rest at least one day. My answer to this was, we're right at the end of soybeans and before corn. How about Jeannie and I take a ride down toward Vero and play in the water for a couple of days? We'll be good and not start any babies, but it will give us a chance to see if we trust each other and get to know each other better. Jeannie surprised the heck out of me and got up next to me before sliding into my lap. The little vixen said, why can't we start a baby? We're both of age and want what that's all about. You've hardly kissed me and held me enough to help me be satisfied. I promise to be good, but we're going to have to make up our minds pretty soon. I'm tired of waiting. That was enough to pacify the situation at that moment, and I had lunch, That was often chicken and turkey because both farms had too many chickens and turkeys, catered from then on. There was always a chicken or turkey roasting in the oven. The roast beef sandwiches always hit the spot after there was a beef roast for supper. We did our week in Vero and played in the water and with each other until we were on the edge of doing everything. I did everything Mom and Dad taught me, and Jeannie did everything her mom taught her. I learned a lot about the female anatomy that week. Jeannie assured everyone back home she still technically was a virgin. I kept talking about how the bigger elevators had grinders and mixers when harvest ended, and we were down to only needing 2 part-timers. A farmer could have his own corn ground up and could mix other grains to have it all blended together. That required an additional building, but it would hold supplements and sorghum to mix into the feeds. The building was built fairly fast, and another full-time position was added to the elevator. Christmas was fun as June got married and Sarah announced her engagement to a city guy who seemed nice. He had a good job as assistant store manager at a grocery store. That was hard work, but that's what made the world go round. It was during January that I bought a wedding ring. I didn't buy an engagement ring, since when would a farmer's wife wear it? I asked Jeannie, can we get married on Valentine's Day? When I proposed, Jeannie said, get the almanac. It always has a bunch of years in it. Let's see when Valentine's Day is. Valentine's Day was going to be on Friday, so the dance would in all likelihood be Friday too. I thought it would be good to get married and then hold our reception at the Valentine's Day dance. We went to the VFW and spoke with the guy in charge of everything and explained what we wanted. The man said, why not have the wedding here? We'll have the wedding at 6 and the dance starts at 8. You kids can have your cake and food and continue right through the dance. The preacher is a member, so he'll be agreeable. You know, you're due for your draft notice. You best be getting one in the oven, or you'll soon be in the army. I wondered about that. It was a plan, so we worked on getting everything set. Valentine's Day arrived, and the gala wedding went off perfectly. The dance seemed to have some special significance that year because Jeannie and I were getting married. We planned on going to Miami Beach for a honeymoon and made arrangements for me to be off work for a week. We drove to the cemetery and talked to Julia the night of our wedding. Jeannie thanked Julia for the best man any woman could have. I told Julia that we would think of her often this coming week. With that done, we drove south until we were tired and checked into a cabin. We had what could only be described as an orgy while learning how to really pleasure each other. Let me tell you that all that stuff about 2 people giving each other pleasure was right on the button. The 2 of us played at everything. We had to keep taking a break to go to the big hotel room for some more of what we enjoyed. It was April when Jeannie came to me in the morning and told me, you're going to be a father around Thanksgiving. We must have done it the first week we were married. Your boss said you wouldn't be drafted now because you would be the sole provider for the family. I don't want you going off to the army. They are fighting over there in Asia. Mom and Dad wanted Jeannie and me to stay at the house, and me to continue to work at the elevator and work the farm. Dad said that the experience at the elevator would even better prepare me for being a farmer. The elevator owner and operator, Morgan Blakes, got me aside the first day of May and told me something really special. My wife really liked the way you worked at the telephone company, Tom. She told me to hire you part-time, and I wouldn't regret it. She was right. I have some pull with the local draft board and kept knocking you back because I knew you were going to get married. Well, you did, and you're going to be a dad now, so you'll be getting a deferment. I have another reason. I'm getting up there in years and need someone to take over here. You're a smart kid and have been working as manager for almost a year and seem to be able to run all parts of the mill. I propose to make you my partner with a 10% ownership share of the business. You'll take your 10% of the profits as your pay. That's just for the first year. Each year for the next 10 years your share will go up 10% and mine will go down 10% until you own the business outright. That will let me retire now with a steady income over the next few years. Give what you've been saying about ways to grow the business. You might even manage to increase my net income despite the decline in my share, at least at first. I'll still be around for advice, but you'll be the working boss. What do you think of the deal? Holy smokes, could this be real? Let me talk it over tonight, and we'll make a deal tomorrow. It should be peaceful tomorrow, but there will be a line of trucks in the morning as soon as we say it. I first spoke to Jeannie about the opportunity at home that night. She wanted to know if I had said yes. I told her I needed to talk to her first. We then went down to supper where I told Mom and Dad the same story. Dad asked me what I told Morgan Blake. I told Morgan that I would talk to my wife and you two about it. I think this is a great opportunity, but it's going to take me away from ever being a farmer. Dad said, I'm not ready to quit yet, and our neighbor has boys growing up. You could have someone who's the right age to help on the farm and eventually take over. Clint has a couple of boys who will be field ready soon. I'm sure he'll lend me one of them. Take this opportunity, Tom, but make sure Morgan uses a good lawyer to make sure the deal is solid. Take a copy of the contract to our lawyer in Melbourne when you get it. He'll read it and tell you right away if it's a good deal. You still don't have the money for your car, and the other lawyers are trying every delay tactic they can. They don't understand that a farmer won't go broke waiting for a settlement. Clint and I are going to be in court at the same time. Sarah's due for a big payout that will help her and her new husband. You'll get your car money, and the Kennedys will get enough to send some of the kids to college. I asked Dad, what kind of time limit is there for this suit to be settled? Dad replied, there's no time limit now that Clint and I both filed suit. You'll have to settle with your insurance company soon. There is a time limit to accept a payment of a claim. The lawyer can tell you what it is when he looks over your agreement with Morgan. He's familiar with your case. All this lawyer talk makes me nervous. Jeannie and I settled in our new queen-size bed that night, enjoying each other's company. You never have to worry about being uncomfortable with a big bed. Jeannie always liked to hug my back, saying it helped her relax and sleep better. I fell asleep thinking about Julia and how proud she would be of her sister. I loved this younger version of Julia. I told Morgan to get me a copy of the contract so I could review it the next day. He said, you're in luck. I have it right here, ready to sign. Come sign this, and I can start thinking about retiring. That's not what you told me yesterday, I replied. Morgan said, come into the office and take your time reading it. It's not that long, but it could make you a wealthy man over time. I told Morgan, Dad thinks I should run this by our attorney so he can look it over. Let me take it to him, and I'll be back in a couple of hours. There's nothing pressing right now. Morgan acted almost angry. I don't know why you have to have someone look at it. Don't you think I'm honest? Don't fret over it, Morgan. This contract will commit the rest of my life to right here in this elevator and mill. I'll have it looked at if Dad says to have it looked at. I'll be back in a couple of hours. Morgan's attitude scared me, and I almost turned around to tell him no deal. I needed to find out about the car anyway, so I rolled up to my attorney's office in less than 30 minutes. I was in luck and didn't have to wait for him. He said he had time for me and took me into his office. I handed him the contract when he asked what he could do for me, and I briefly described what I thought it was. He called his secretary and asked for 2 copies of the contract. He asked if there was anything else while we were waiting, and I mentioned that I was concerned about the timeline to accept the claim on my car. He smiled and explained that the time limit was paused when the party you file against accepts the suit and makes their first offer. While the offer has been increasing with each round, we are still far from an acceptable amount. I've requested a jury trial to avoid you having to keep accumulating billable hours. The secretary returned with 2 copies of the contract that looked as good as the original. Noticing my surprise, she said, "This is from our new copier. No more smudges, and they all turn out this well if I do it right." Our attorney chuckled and said, "Modern technology is a wonderful thing." He took a copy and began highlighting certain phrases and sections. Almost finished, he paused, took a deep breath, and said, "This is problematic." I asked, "What do you mean?" He pointed to a clause and said, "This part, in a roundabout way, states that this contract becomes void if either your family or the Kennedy family rejects the next offers in their lawsuits. All payments made to Morgan Blake so far would then be kept by him. I'm heading to Tallahassee on Wednesday to defend a case in front of the Florida Supreme Court, but I'll have some time afterward. I'll check in with the Bar Association and have them review this contract while I'm there. This seems unethical to me, and it could be very significant for you and for Mr. Blake, as his attorney may have slipped this in on him." "I don't think so, sir." Morgan Blake was being very nervous about me not signing the contract right away. It's his stepbrother who had almost 100% interest in the telephone company. That Blake died after an accident while driving drunk, so there are some squabbles going on about who is going to get what from that estate. Our lawyer smiled and said he would research this before presenting it to the bar. He said, "What do you want to do?" I thought it would be good security for me and my family when I heard the original deal, but I don't want that security if it means the Kennedy family loses out. He said, "What else does this man hold over you?" If that isn't enough, he told me he was on the draft board and had me kicked back until I was married with a baby in the hopper. Can he do something to mess that up? I didn't know he did that, and I would have gone if I had received a notice. I have obligations now, so I'm less patriotic. He can do it if he wants, but you have the perfect case for a deferment. Let me work on that too. I don't think he can work on it that fast. Go to work and just tell him your attorney was busy and couldn't review the contract, but it didn't look bad so far. I busted but the rest of the week waiting for the attorney to call. He called and asked me, "Would you be willing to serve in the National Guard? I think he can skate being selective as a draft board member and justify your past deferment. I don't know what all this means, but I'll volunteer for the Florida National Guard if you say I should do it." The attorney said, "This will give you time to have your baby while I work this case through the federal courts. I think you'll come out without having to ship out overseas, but you'll have to go through basic training. Let me work this, and I'll be truthful. I'm going to crucify this guy for letting family influence him. He'll probably be sanctioned by the courts for manipulating the draft to accommodate his preferences. Those who he let slide will immediately be called up unless they can prove their deferment. False statements on that federal form are grounds for some jail time. I groaned and then said, this is terrible. All this is from a couple of guys getting mad about getting caught trying to assault a girl. I still haven't heard what happened to the other guys involved. The attorney said, all are serving 10 years to life because their actions led to the deaths of their friends and Julia. We're using all those convictions to get our civil case advanced. I sadly said, this is still all terrible. This is 4 years later, and people are still suffering and will suffer more in the future. I told Morgan on Monday, I felt guilty about skating the draft and decided to sign up for the Florida National Guard. I'll probably leave this Friday. Go find someone else for your deal. I don't think my attorney liked the contract. Morgan said, don't do this. I can get you a deferment and you won't have to go to basic training. I can make sure you don't have to go overseas. Listen to me, Tom. This is important. Don't let this get out of hand. Going to Melbourne to enlist in the National Guard was scary since I was signing up for 6 years, although it wasn't going to be like 6 years of active duty. First was 10 weeks of basic training here in Florida, and possibly up to 6 months of on-the-job training. I was a farmer, grain elevator worker, and manager, so what was I capable to do? I should be home when the baby got here if I didn't have to go to a long training school. The recruiter asked why I was there when I went to sign up. I truthfully told him that I was avoiding the draft because I had a pregnant wife and needed to remain around to take care of her and the baby that was coming. I took a test that had 96 dumb questions. There was even a basic algebra problem most 7th or 8th graders could answer. The guy used a cheat sheet with holes in it to grade the test. What do you know? I had them all correct. The next question was what job I wanted to do in the Guard. I told him that I was a farmer and had been managing a grain elevator and mill for a couple years, although I didn't begin managing until about a year ago. I told him how I had worked on a telephone switchboard for the local telephone company part-time when in high school and had worked part-time for a feed store. I told him I still had to keep up with farm duties and chores. The man asked, did you have to repair the equipment you worked with? Sure, farm equipment breaks. You have to do some welding sometimes, but mostly tearing something down, fixing or replacing a part, and putting it back together. You do that at the telephone company too because a socket or plug could go bad or a wire could get loose. The grain elevator had 1,000 things that could and often did break, but they didn't break down as often if you fixed them right. Can you fix cars and trucks? I chuckled before I answered. They're just like farm equipment with fewer things to fix. The recruiter asked, did you have to keep track of inventory at the grain elevator? Of course, you have to know what's in each of the huge silos to within a few bushels. The products we sold that weren't grain, like salt blocks, fence wire, and things like coal oil heaters had to be exact on the inventory. The mill products that we mixed with grains had to be exact too. It's a lot, but still a 1, 2, 3, 4 type of thing. The guy said, I can use you in dozens of different MOS specialties, but I'm going to ask my lieutenant to help us make a choice. Wait here, he might want to meet you. The officer came into the room, so I stood thinking that's what I should do. He smiled and said, sit. You don't have to stand for a first lieutenant unless he's your commanding officer. He sat with the sergeant and read the man's notes. I had noticed how neatly the sergeant wrote and wished everyone I dealt with took that much care writing information. The guy liked to smile and did it again as he looked at me. A draft dodger, huh? You know, the Guard can be federalized in a national emergency or war, though that's not likely. Do you want to go full-time or do the usual weekend a month and 2 weeks in the summer? I told him, I like the weekend a month and 2 weeks during summer. The guy was direct. Why? I probably wouldn't make enough to support my wife and the baby that's coming if I was on active duty all the time. The big thing would be that I could probably be home when the baby comes. That's logical, but what if I had a job that you could travel to every day and could just about guarantee you enough rank for you to make enough to support them? I had to tell the man, that's a lot of maybes. Tell me about what you're thinking. The lieutenant said, we don't have anyone to manage our vehicles, their inventory, parts inventory, or able to do minor repairs when required. I can almost guarantee you specialist or corporal your first year. You would be more popular than Sophia Loren if you were to be able to respond to some of the small offices scattered around near here. We have 2 mechanics in the motor pool, but that's what they are and all they want to be. I need someone to tell them what to do, when to do it, and where to do it at. They are good men, and we have staffing for another mechanic, but I need someone to manage it all. I told the man, I didn't see that many vehicles here. Where are they all? We have a big garage and field full of Jeeps and trucks. We take everything for a run once a month when we have our monthly drill weekend. It's not that great of a shakedown, but it's been working. What happens if I sign up thinking I'm going to get that job and I get sent somewhere else? Can't happen. I'll put you in as qualified to run our motor pool. You really need to be a sergeant, but we'll have to wait for that. Keep your nose clean and you'll be promoted as fast as the regulations permit. Based on your test score and your other qualifications, I think we can start you off as an E2. which is just the second grade of buck private, and then push you to E4, corporal, in a year, and maybe all the way to E6 staff sergeant within 3 years. Should I or shouldn't I? I wanted to do my part, and I was skating on a lot of stuff other guys were having to do. I said, okay, I'll do it. I will need to be off for a day or so when the baby comes. The officer said, the military doesn't work well doing that, but you'll be given a pass unless it's on a weekend camp. You'll actually have an open pass, because you'll probably want to live at home and drive in daily. You might even get a vehicle so you can go to other offices. I told the two, don't make it sound too good or you'll scare me. They laughed. I signed. Dad wrote me a letter 2 weeks into basic training and told me Morgan Blake committed suicide because he didn't want to face the feds looking into his preferential treatment of draftees. Don't feel sorry for him, but feel sympathy for his wife. You could run the elevator for her if you were here. Be a good soldier and be smart. Do what you're asked and do it the best you can. Love, Dad. What a shock. A man who I respected went from being my hero to a scumbag in just a couple of weeks. Jeannie wrote to tell me the news of the 2 families at least 3 times a week. Sarah was pregnant and was excited that our 2 kids could and would be buddies. I had to report to Camp Blanding for basic training, which is located between Gainesville and Jacksonville. I had Dad take me there and watch as I signed in before heading to the area where they would be swearing us in. Dad wished me luck, reminded me to bring a little cash, and then left. Basic training wasn't as hard as I expected. There was a lot of running, but that wasn't new to me. I spent most of my days running between the main buildings and silos. There was climbing, but I was already used to it from going up and down the silos to check moisture levels. We crawled a lot too, but the uniforms we wore were designed for that. Some of the guys didn't like getting dirty, but it didn't bother me. We had laundry services. The only thing I didn't enjoy was the yelling. From the first minute, they had men yelling in your face, and some of them had terrible breath. I made sure not to laugh or smile. I kept my composure and always answered the way they expected. There were no formalities like sir, yes, sir, just yes, sergeant, or no, sergeant. We did a lot of shooting practice, which was enjoyable. Some of the guys probably wouldn't hit a target, but I had some experience. Dad taught me to shoot a small rifle when I was younger, and later I used a bigger one for hunting deer and pigs. The instructors had their own way of showing us how to clean the rifles, which felt a bit off to me, but Dad always said to follow their instructions. They made me a platoon leader during the 6th week of basic training, which gave me a stripe for private first class. I had to call cadence when we were marching, hound the sluggards when we were running, check the barracks guard before I went to bed, and wake up to make sure the next shift got up in time and the current guard wasn't sleeping. These guys should have worked with me during harvest when the lines of trucks and wagons didn't allow us to go home, and we worked all night with a short nap on top of a bag of grain. I still did my rotation cleaning latrines, and was on my hands and knees using my laundry bag to polish the waxed floor. The guys all knew I wanted us to stand out in a good way. We won the Best Barracks Award the last 5 weeks of basic. I thought I was going to AIT here at Camp Blanding. I received some official-looking papers that were confusing as hell. After reading them a dozen times, I was supposed to report to the lieutenant I had met in Melbourne. I had my first military check that included $8.56 for a bus ticket. I suppose I could call Dad, but I'd save it to get home. I walked into the National Guard office with my duffel bag and told the sergeant that I was reporting for duty. He looked at me and said, "We have a barracks with 2-man rooms, but you live over near Deer Park, right?" When I nodded, he said, "You were allowed 2 days to get here, and today is Friday, so get a ride home and show up at 7 Monday morning. Our workday is generally 7:30 or 8 to 5, depending on what's going on. Next weekend is your first weekend with the part-timers. The lieutenant will talk to you more about what he wants to happen on Monday. Uniform will be fatigues. Now tell me how you have a stripe." I laughed and told him, "They made me a platoon leader, and that gave me a stripe they allowed me to keep. That'll screw up the lieutenant's plan to get that first stripe for you right away. I guess he can go for 2. If you can pass all the tests for E4 corporal or specialist, you can get that too." I asked, should I use the pay phone in the hall, or could I use the phone here to call for a ride? "Use this one, but don't hang on the phone. They do watch the bills." I called home. The phone was answered by Jeannie. She squealed to Mom that I was calling. I told both that I was in Melbourne waiting for someone to come get me. I would be home until Monday. Mom said, "I'll take the truck down to where your father is working. He'll come and get you." I asked, Jeannie was a good driver. Why can't she come for me? "But she's pregnant, Tom. That might not be good for the baby." "Oh, come on, Mom. Pregnant women are out driving tractors all over the place. Have her use the newer car if you'll feel better, but I want to see my wife and folks." "Okay, she'll leave right away. She at least has a decent dress on and her hair is brushed. Come get me, Jeannie." I heard them hang up and then at least 3 more hang-ups. Everyone in the community will know I'm home from training. Mom would come along for the ride to be sure Jeannie was okay if I figured right. She was going to be a real busybody with the new baby. I waited in the lobby knowing that it would take at least 30 to 40 minutes to get here. Sure enough, Dad came driving up, with Mom in the front and Jeannie in the back, almost 40 minutes after the call. They were all out of the car to give and get hugs, handshake, and a big smooch as soon as it stopped. It had been 2.5 months, but that isn't all that long because I was busy all the time. I put my duffel bag in the trunk of the car and Dad asked me if I wanted to drive. No, sir, I'm going to sit in the back seat and smooch with my wife. We made it home with a lot of daylight left, so Dad said he wanted to finish the last field. I went in and was going to unpack my duffel bag, but thought better of it. I pulled out a set of fatigues and looked at them to be sure they were clean. I told the two women, I want to wash these again and starch them so I can properly press them. I want to look good for my first day on duty. Jeannie said, teach me how to iron them, and I'll do all your uniforms so you always look sharp. I helped on the farm on Friday and Saturday. I went to church on Sunday where I sat next to Mom and Jeannie, who still held my hand, and her dad's. Sarah went to church up in Gainesville, where she lived now. I'm really not surprised that Mom and Dad wanted Jeannie and me to live with them, as Jeannie was company for Mom, and I was good at least for morning chores. It felt really good to be a part of the farm life again. The cow was dry, but was going to have a calf soon. Our baby wouldn't need cow's milk for a while, but Jeannie needs it. Sunday dinner included the Kennedys and a surprise guest. Mrs. Blake was there to welcome me home. She told me that she was sorry Morgan had treated me wrong. I told her he didn't because I left. He didn't hurt me in any way. I needed to serve, and this was a good way. It was great duty because I could commute to Melbourne every day if what they said was true. She told me that she might make me a deal when my enlistment was up. I told her we'd talk about it when the time came. I showed Jeannie how I did the military crease on the fatigue shirt that evening. I showed her how the crease was supposed to go front and back, and the pants creases should match. She made me put another pair of fatigues on, and she measured where the creases should be, but she also said she needed to make the shirt and pants fit better. I hope she didn't mess any of them up as I only had 4 pair. I would order more sets as soon as I found out where to order them from. I was up at 5 Monday morning, had the chores done, ate breakfast, and was on the road in my pickup truck. It didn't look all that good, but ran perfect and had decent tires. I parked at 6:45 in an empty parking lot where I had seen other civilian vehicles had parked the previous Thursday. I went to the nearest gas station and bought a newspaper instead of just sitting. I went back to the office and read the newspaper until I saw the 2 men who were mechanics drive up. They walked toward the back. The lieutenant then came in, and the sergeant was last. I walked in after the sergeant and watched him squint at me as if through a hangover. He asked if I could make coffee and directed me to a small kitchen behind his office. I put a pot of coffee on a hot plate and asked the man, I didn't bring my duffel with me. Am I correct to assume I won't be staying in the barracks under normal circumstances? The sergeant looked at me, looked at his watch, and said, Christ, am I going to have to put up with you being here early every day chatting away like a teenage girl? I laughed while looking at the clock on the wall and said, we were told in training to always be at the appointed place no later than 15 minutes early. I'll remain quiet until the time is right or coffee is made. I heard a grunt in reply. The lieutenant came out and waved me to come with him. His office was in the back of the building. He had me sit, and then he began. Sarge probably puts a few away on weekends, but is always here and on time. Now for the important stuff. I want you to go back to our motor pool building and office and try to put everything in some kind of workable order. You're not going to do this in a day or maybe in a week. Work on making it neat, orderly, and militarily correct until you have everything in some sort of order. We have an order form that we submit weekly if you need paper products. Sarge, or I will help if you have trouble with form numbers or descriptions. Most forms have their part number on either top or bottom right. The Army requires us to use records and forms that are part of TMMS, the Army Maintenance Management System, and you're eventually going to have to learn that. I've ordered a program text for your use, and there'll be a 1-week course offered in this region sometime in the next few months. Half your job will be the paperwork, and it's the easiest half to get failed on in the annual IG inspection, but fortunately we have almost 9 months to get ready for that. I want to make our weekends count for something, so one of the first things I want is a driving school. I want every troop to be able to drive every vehicle. We don't have anything except rubber-wheeled vehicles, so get a couple ready to use. They should all be ready, but we don't have time to test drive them all except on weekends. We'll need a track or course for a driving school. We can use the big field in front of the motor pool building. Lay it out so the guys who have never driven a big truck can learn and be proficient. We'll do this every camp weekend until you think our men are up to a convoy if it were necessary. We have 2 fairly new staff cars that are supposed to be for the sergeant and me to run to schools and colleges to get recruits. Neither of the cars run worth a shit. Our mechanics say there is something wrong with the carburetors, and also something is wrong with the replacement rotor caps we've been sent. We should be able to get the correct parts locally if necessary, since they are Chevrolets. Please look at the two cars and see if you find something wrong with them. We have a slush fund for minor purchases like that, since the Army makes the NG order everything through the supply system. I noticed a wall full of keys tagged with vehicle numbers. There were two sets of keys next to sedans, so I took both and went out back and saw the two cars sitting there filthy with dust. That shouldn't be. First things first, I matched a set of keys and went to use them on the first car. Why bother? It was open. I slid the key into the ignition, shifted to neutral, and hit the button. Nothing. Then I noticed the sign that said, "Depress clutch before attempting to start car." Something new. I pushed the clutch in and twisted the key. The car cranked and finally caught. It sounded so rough that I wondered why someone with a gun didn't come out and shoot it. This was just something to troubleshoot. I let it idle to see if it would smooth out. I went to the second car, and it had the same malady. I had an epiphany when it did finally start. I shut the one car off and drove the other to the motor pool area. The two mechanics were working on a 2.5-ton truck. I introduced myself and asked the two men if they knew where the spare gas filters were. The guys both said the center drawer in the desk in the office for the sedans. The problem shouldn't be that because we could blow through the ones in the car. I went in and looked through the shop manual to see where the filters were. I knew there might be more than one, and I also knew how one tank of bad gas could make your life miserable. Just as I thought, there was a filter down along the outside fender wall. I found a screwdriver and loosened the clamp and removed the filter. The thing was almost clogged tight with what looked like rust. I found the replacement filters and put the correct one in. I hoped the fuel tanks had been flushed after all that grime. I started the car and it ran fine. I really doubted the rotor caps were bad. I asked the two mechanics, "You guys obviously had a big tank of bad gas around here a while back." The one guy said, "Yeah, we had to drain every vehicle and flush the tanks. We were able to keep the gas by filtering it twice with some industrial filters. We replaced the in-ground tanks and now make the provider filter on the way into our tanks. That was a mess. I know we drained and flushed the tanks on the two staff cars. I found another filter before the pump. I'm surprised the pump didn't get jammed up with all the crud that was in the first filter." I held the filter up and said, "This will give you all the symptoms you and the office guys were talking about." The two guys followed me into the office to look at the shop manual for the cars. Sure enough, they just stared at where the other filter was. The one guy went to the center desk drawer and pulled another of the longer filters and said, "Let's get this other one running and get them washed. We'll be heroes." I smiled as Dad always taught me to look twice before deciding once, or something like that. I went into the office again and realized it was sweltering in there. A thermometer on the wall said 115, but you can't trust some of those old thermometers. The guys had a single small fan running. I asked, "Don't you have a couple bigger fans? I need some small ones in the office, but you guys need some big shop fans." The man who obviously was the leader said, "No budget, or at least that's what we're told. See what you can do." I dusted all around the office and then swept it out. I hunted for the SOP book that I knew had to be there. One of the instructors in basics said that answers to all questions were in the SOP book. I found the book and found page after page of newer SOPs that had not been put in. I scooped everything that looked like an SOP and put them into a U.S. mail basket. I supposed it was legal to use that. A piece of paper on top said, "Operating budget." It was for the current year, so I put it where I could reference it. I found a dozen sheets of paper that said modifications to motor pool budget. I put those with the operating budget. There was a bunch of tickets where parts had been purchased locally. They weren't logged in anywhere I found yet, but I put them all together and took one to check on it. I called the GM dealer and asked to speak to their accounts receivable clerk. I told her who I was and gave her a ticket number. She said it had been paid. I almost said goodbye, but asked, how much was that ticket for? The price on her books was $25 higher than the ticket. The National Guard was getting scammed if this happened on every locally purchased part. One more thing to look at. I missed lunch and was having that gnawing feeling in my stomach when I went to find a clock that worked. The two mechanics said, "We're cleaning up. It's almost quitting time." I asked the two, "So no one uses the barracks?" The one said, "Only on camp weekends and the annual 2 weeks. We've already had the 2 weeks that were a disaster. That's when we discovered the tank full of bad gas. I think all the guys went home smelling like gas. Next weekend is a camp weekend. What are you doing for that?" I told the two about the driving school. The two said they would get 2 vehicles of each size ready for the weekend. They pointed to 3 huge stacks of cones. The one said, "We've wanted to do that for a long while. Now go tell the lieutenant and the sarge the cars are ready." We washed them and ran them up and down the road to make sure. "You're a farmer, huh? I guess you guys have to be pretty handy." I was filthy from all the dust, but went in to tell the lieutenant the 2 staff cars were ready to roll. He looked at me funny and asked, "How did you do that?" Did you buy some expensive parts? No, sir. I read the shop manual and found something that's easy to miss. It has to do with that bad gas you guys had. We need to make sure we keep using the filtered pump nozzles so we don't repeat that problem. The man said, "Go home, troop." A good first day, the Sarge said. The guys in the back came up and told me you found the problem. I'm lucky to have talked you into coming to work with us. I asked him, I don't know the answer to this yet, but we need some big shop fans and a couple little fans in the office. His answer was, I think we can buy them locally if we can get a good price. See if you can find it in the motor pool SOP. I nodded and headed back to the back again. I pulled my basket of SOPs and asked, how do I get a key so I can get in here earlier than your starting time, whatever it is? It's supposed to be at 7:30, but the office doesn't always show until 8. See if this is supposed to be an 8-hour or 9-hour a day duty station while you're looking stuff up. We don't mind the extra hour, but they don't pay any extra. There are keys for our main door out here on the nail, just inside the door. The key on the nail on the window is for the front office if we have to get in there early. The man was right about the starting time, and I thought I would look it up. We were probably supposed to begin at 8 and take an hour for lunch. I'm sure the guys took that long or longer, so they weren't really being taken advantage of. I hauled my U.S. mail basket out to my truck and set it on the floor with a cover over it so the papers didn't fly all over. I was happy to drive home with the windows open for some air circulation. This was Florida, and it was hot. There was a strange car in the parking area at home. I wasn't even out of my car when Dad came from the house. Who's here, Dad? Check this car out and tell me what you think, son. Whose is it, and where did it come from? Just never you mind. And look at the car to see what you think. This was a new 2-door hardtop Ford Fairlane. A nice car in a maroon and white two-tone. I looked into the car and saw that it had a floor shift. Why would a car like this have a floor shift? Everything looked nice with the vinyl bench seats in the front along with a radio in the dash. Two things, Dad. Why does it have a floor shift, and it seems like the car sits a little low? Dad went to the front of the car and lifted the hood. Wow, that's a big V8. Dad said, this is a special model with a 4-speed transmission. This is one very hot car. Nice, Dad, but who would want one of these? Dad was laughing. You're a young guy and need a hot car. This thing will probably do 120 out of tune. I can't drive that fast because the tires won't hold up and I can't afford the tickets. This thing invites anyone who knows the car to want to challenge you to a race. That'll either get a ticket or get you killed. I need a good 4-door car, maybe in this color scheme, but it should be a small V8 or 6-cylinder with a column shift. Now tell me why this car is here. This is the settlement for your car. I'm sure the dealer will gladly give you what you want instead of this. He told me he could only get one of these models, so this is special. Let me call him and see what he has. Dad, did the lawyer say this was all right? Are you and the Kennedys going to be taken care of? All yes, son, and we've signed the releases, as has your sister. Clint told me no one was going to beef about anything after the trial. Your car is the last thing to be put to bed. Go call the man and see what he has. He could just have found me another 47 Chevy, made it nice, and I would have been happy. People astound me with their attempts at trying to outdo someone. I hope he gets something from that crazed old driver. Dad talked on the phone for about 5 minutes before turning around and asked, is the exact same color scheme good? I nodded and the conversation was over. I cleaned up, with Jeannie asking how I can get so dirty working in an office. I had to explain that I worked on a couple of cars and the office I was going to work in was filthy with dust. I warned her, I'm going to be cleaning for a few days, so this is going to continue. Oh, and this weekend is the camp weekend for the regular guardsmen. I'll probably be busy all weekend. We had just finished eating when a car came up the lane. I walked out to see a 4-door Fairlane come to a stop. It was painted exactly like the other car, but this was more of a maroon and cream instead of white. I liked it. The car had a radio and column shift. The guy got out and said, this has a full 6-month warranty on parts and labor. Do your regular oil changes and maintenance, and this car will last you a long time. I agreed with him and accepted the keys and title papers. We pulled the tags off the fancy hardtop and put them on the 4-door. I could only hope it had a reasonable size motor. This was a car my wife was going to be driving my child around in. I called the Farm Bureau agent to change the policy numbers when the dealer's agent was gone. I told them I was keeping my pickup and that my wife was going to be using the new car. That part of that terrible day was finally put to bed. I still wanted to dig the son of bitch up and kill him again. I worked on the SOPs while talking to Jeannie Monday night. We discussed boys and girls' names. She asked me if we could name a girl Julia. Of course we could. She wanted to name a boy after me, which was okay, but I told her there are a lot of Toms in our family history. We might want to pick something different. She thought about it and said she would consider other names. I finished putting the pages into the SOP binder and had the opportunity to read them all. I had the answers to motor pool hours that were to be 8 to 5 with an hour for lunch. I later told the guys that 7:30 to 5 was alright if they wanted to continue to take an hour and a half for lunch. They looked a little sheepish when I told them, but nodded in agreement. The answer for the fans was in the miscellaneous part of the budget. I remembered that the previous year's miscellaneous budget wasn't used at all, so we might as well have some fans. I bet I could get them delivered right away. I knew the guys would like to have some circulating air in the near 100-degree heat. Tuesday was neat as I parked where the civilian cars were to be parked and went to the motor pool building. I opened everything up so air would flow through and then called the local appliance store. I told the man who answered that I wanted 2 large fans on tall stands and 1 box fan the same size. I also wanted a 12-inch fan for office use. The guy spouted off prices that seemed very high. I asked, "Your prices seem pretty high. Is that the best you can do?" The guy was belligerent and said that's what he should be getting for the tall and box fan. I told him I would call him back. I may be wrong, but I think I can do better on the price. I called an Orlando appliance store and received a better price, but still too high. I called a Tampa appliance store and was given some prices that were half of what the Melbourne store offered. I referenced some government part numbers, and the salesman said that the fans I wanted were that model. When I told him I wanted 4 of the fans on stands and a box fan, plus 2 12-inch fans for the office, the man excitedly said, "An order like that has free shipping anywhere in the state of Florida." I told the guy that he may want to change his mind as this was in Melbourne. He quickly replied, "We deliver down there at least a couple times a week." He said he had to check inventory, put the phone down, and after coming back said, "We'll deliver today if that's good." All I could think of was great. Another problem solved. Instead of working on the office, I walked the fields I wanted to use for the driving course. We needed some bumps and berms. There were some tracked vehicles parked along the fence, so I asked our guys about them. The office has been trying to get rid of them for a couple of years, but they have not had any luck. "What do you want to do with them?" "I want to use the bulldozer to make a couple berms to drive over and some dips for bumps." It shouldn't take long at all with that big backhoe and the bulldozer. I knew how to handle a bulldozer as I had helped do some creek work before. The batteries were dead, so I pulled them and brought them to our building to be charged. I then spent the rest of the day making a driving course for the various vehicles. I wanted to make the berms the right height so that the Jeeps would roll over if they hit them wrong. The 4x6s wouldn't have a problem as long as they weren't going too fast. We had the delivery vans that were the medic trucks and big box trucks for the comm vans. I wondered where the big flatbeds for the bulldozer and backhoe were. I replaced the batteries in the bulldozer and backhoe when they were charged. I started the bulldozer and let it idle. The fuel tanks were both full, so I should be fine. I had staked out where I needed the dips and berms and began digging. I had some deep holes and fairly steep berms by lunch. I took an old Jeep and ran it over the track as I saw it, and then one of the new 151 Jeeps with the tall bodies that were constantly rolling over. I made sure every vehicle has signs to buckle their seat belts, as rollovers were a possibility. We had installed seat belts in the 2 model Jeeps to keep drivers in the vehicle if they should roll. I rolled the 151 while the 2 mechanics roared with laughter. Thank goodness it rolled all the way over and didn't bend anything. I did the same berm, but slower, turned into it, and made it alongside without a problem. The small 4x6 and big deuce and a half were easy. You just had to make sure of your gearing, or you would stall the big truck, and those diesels were not easy to start, even warm. The guys took more than an hour for lunch, while I found a tiny diner that had good sandwiches and takeout sodas in cans. I spent the rest of Tuesday working on the office. The delivery truck showed up with the fans. I had the driver fill out the military invoice that he was expecting, and then we were like kids at Christmas. The big tall fans were quickly in place, as well as the box fan that pushed more air around the lower floor. I put 2 fans in the office and watched the temperature go down 20 degrees. No more sweat bath. I looked around and decided I should be done with the office by tomorrow, and then I would focus on the camp weekend. The files, as well as the logging of receipts, wouldn't be done yet, but some of the big stuff will have all been done in the office would at least look as if in order. Wednesday went almost exactly like expected while I was able to begin repairing files and sorting receipts. I needed some accounting paper, so I went to the office to see what they had in their stockroom. They had 6, 8, and 10 column. I had no idea what I would need, so I took a small 10-column pad. I began listing the item, the date, for what vehicle number, military part number, the suggested retail price in the price book, the actual price, and the date paid. 8 columns would have done the trick, but I might come up with another item to record. Oh yeah, how about the vendor name and number? Now just 1 column left. I shoved all the receipts into my U.S. mail basket and slid my big 10-column pad on top. This was going to be homework. I brought 4 of the main parts catalogs with me, so I would have the correct part numbers and the suggested retail price. Every shelf was dusted, the floor was mopped, all the books, catalogs, and military regs were in their folders on the shelves when I looked around. The place needed painting, and I would do that next month. No sense in having a trashy office. This wasn't a tough job, and I did have a couple of guys who busted, but every day, or at least looked and acted like it. They asked me questions if they didn't understand something, and I was usually able to find the answer, so we were a cohesive group. I put my completed receipt book on the shelf Thursday morning, but worried over it as I had seen about half the invoices had overcharges or illegal service charges. I would address that, but I wanted to discuss how we would handle the driving school with the lieutenant. I waited until 8:15 to make sure he had his coffee and then went to see him. He had a mean frown on his face and was being curt with me. I asked if there was any special way he wanted to handle the driving school. He sat back in chair and said, "Right, you do have the school this weekend. Do you think you can pull it off? I have the ditches dug and some berms to cause rollovers in the light vehicles. We have 2 of each vehicle ready and tested. It should go well depending on how many men we have." The man said, "I just found out we have no food. I would usually have outside people here to supply supper tomorrow night, 3 meals on Saturday and 2 on Sunday. The caterer says they have another commitment and forgot to notify us. Shit. I don't know how to handle it." I pointed at Winter Haven on his map of Florida National Guard units. "Call the commander there and see if they can come here to feed us. It'll be out of your budget, but probably cheaper than a caterer. I'll send 3 trucks to bring all their equipment down if they need transportation. We only have 2 mechanics. And me, sir, I still know how to drive." He laughed and said, "Let me call, or should I let you call? Oh, and cut the paperwork to issue yourself an Army driver's license. Since you haven't had the courses for the various vehicles, I'll have to sign it to override the requirement." He called and had a long conversation with the commander there. They had men to drive their trucks and could be down here by 5:30, set up before 7, and serving by 8. They needed power, water, and sewer. The lieutenant had repeated each item and looked at me. I told him, "I'll get it done, not to worry." I somehow figured there had to be a sewer connection near the barracks for temp trailers and shower and comm vans. I found 3 of them. I had the mechanics run hoses to them to make sure they didn't back up. There were 220 and 110 outlets on poles and outside the barracks. Water was available from several faucets that stood up from the ground and marked by large orange wooden trees. What was good was the area for cook group was next to the barracks and wouldn't interfere with the driving school. This was going to work. I went back to the lieutenant and said we were set. He wanted to see it all, so I took him where the electrical outlets were, showed him the sewer openings that had been tested and the water faucets. He asked, "How did you know they would be here?" This place was built for World War II and upgraded during the Korean War. I'll bet we have a budget for improvements that we're not using. We'll look at it next week. Do you want to run a Jeep over the course meanwhile? The lieutenant said, "Sure, let me give it a try." The guys even mentioned that you rolled one over doing it the first time. I made sure he had his seatbelt and helmet on and sent him on his way. He made the first berm fine, but lost it on the next one and did a double rollover before landing on the wheels. The man was laughing hard when he drove back to where the vehicles were lined up and said, "You may have made the course too hard." That was fun, though. Before he left, he said, "You should be the lieutenant out here and not me. You haven't been here a week and you've straightened out years of things." I told the man, "It's difficult to lead if you don't have anyone to lead." He was laughing and said, "That's it. You might as well find the stripes, because I'm getting you promoted tomorrow." He laughed all the way into the building. I went in to ask the Sarge about whether I should plan on staying in the barracks tomorrow and Saturday. He said he didn't think it was necessary, but I might want to come in earlier so I could have breakfast with the other troops and meet everyone. I could do that. Dad would do the chores for me Saturday and Sunday. The question had to be asked since I didn't catch how many the cook group was going to cook for. "How many men will be coming for the weekend?" The sergeant said, "Should be 32. How many will the barracks hold?" "There are 32 man rooms on the top floor and another 15 on the first floor. There are 15 singles for officers. We don't have but 3 officers, so we won't use all the rooms." When I looked confused, he said, "They keep busting this unit up and they are now scattered everywhere. We'll build this up again, and they'll probably disperse us again. You may have resolved an ongoing problem with food by working with Winter Haven. They won't even have to set up sleeping quarters. I'm sure they'll enjoy a bunk instead of a sleeping bag on a cot. The maids of honor will be here at 8 tomorrow morning to give the barracks a once-over. All the bedding will be stripped with new bedding left on top. Everything will be dusted and the floors all mopped. They do the laundry for the barracks, and they're cheap. Our guys pitch in $5 a head for the service. No one bitches. The unit cuts them a nice check as well. We pay them about what laundry service would be. They might come in Monday to see how bad the place is and to see if they need to work on it ahead of the next camp weekend. Well, shoot. I was planning on a hell of a lot more people than under 40. We should invite some other armories to come use the course as long as it's up. I'll ask tomorrow. No homework tonight, but I had some homework with my honey. We talked about how we wanted to remodel the upstairs for the baby. We had a bathroom, tub, and shower up there, but it would be nice to have it more open into the other bedroom. I was going to look at how the house was put together so I could decide how to open it up. I told the family that I would be gone earlier than usual and would need Dad to do morning chores. I would also get home late depending on how settled everyone was. Dad said, "Yeah, but you're here at night to make Jeannie feel good. It also makes your mom and me happy too." Dad went on, "When are you going to paint that nasty pickup of yours? You should put that down for a weekend coming up. I think it should be red or maybe yellow. White would be good, or even a light blue." I was laughing as I said, "Your pickup was painted 10 years ago and could sure use another coat, Dad. You're picking on my dependable old truck that gets me where I need to be. I promise to get it painted so that I don't embarrass you." My mean old man laughed at me. I thought Friday was going to be very busy, but it wasn't. The maids of honor were on site at 8 and gone by 11. I did a walkthrough and was impressed. The windows were even washed. The lieutenant paged me to his office over the Armory public address system I didn't know we had, about 10. I knew I hadn't done anything wrong, so I wasn't worried. I did the door jam knock and was waved in. The man stood and said, "Congratulations. You are now a corporal. You'll progress, but you'll need to take the tests now. An E3 doesn't make much more, but you're serving your country. You'll receive some benefits over the years, and you'll be at least an E6, or I'll have sent you to officers candidate school if we're still together 4 years from now. There will be a pile of rank patches that will come through. Sew them on then, as the orders aren't here yet. You know your 2 men out there are both staff sergeants with more than 10 years. Push those 2 to study for their rank tests so they can progress. You're a leader. You know how to do it." I kept thinking how sad it was for our country to force the young men in the military to fight a terrible enemy for less than $100 a month. Okay, so they sort of get free clothes, room, and board. But they don't even get a real free funeral. They get buried with a marker and a "see you later" guy. I wasn't an objector, but it didn't make sense to a farm boy. I was surprised when a convoy of 4 deuce and a half trucks rolled in about 3. I met them and was asked by their lieutenant where they were to set up. I guided the trucks to where they were to be bivouacked and watched as an old sergeant and the lieutenant walked off distances and had a young troop drive stakes into the ground. The old sarge came to me and said, "You guys are set up nice for us. This will be great." I told the man, "Your men have rooms in the barracks, so there is no need to set up tents. We have good fans in most of the rooms. The officers are in singles on the first floor, and there are more rooms than brass, so you guys with a lot of stripes can sleep in singles too." The sarge was smiling and said, "We made a good deal on food, and we'll plan on even better if you invite us back. We love to go and set up when it is convenient like this. The weekend guys get a chance to show they can produce. Let me get these guys going on getting the cook tent set up." I had to ask, "How come you're so early?" The lieutenant and I got excited and began calling the troops. You know how guys are. They love a chance to do something different. "Sit back, relax, and we'll be cooking in an hour. Watch our dust." My lieutenant came out to see how everything was going and had me introduce him to the other lieutenant. Those 2 sort of wandered toward the office building where I knew they would be telling stories in seconds. My guys said, "Our guys better get here soon or all the good bunks will be gone. The bunks upstairs are a lot warmer because the airflow isn't as good. Let's go look and see if we can fix it. I know where to get fans in a hurry." We went up the back stairs and looked at the second floor rooms. What the upstairs needed was a huge attic fan. In lieu of that, they could use a fan at each of the outside doors and a window fan for each of the rooms. Suck in cooler night air in each of the rooms. Encourage the men to leave the doors open and let the hot air be sucked out at both ends of the barracks' second floor. I counted windows and went to my office to call the local guy first. "This is the National Guard to ask if you want to bid on a bunch of fans again. I want 30 24-inch window fans and 2 36-inch on stands. I need prices and can you deliver today?" The guy asked, "What about that other order we talked about? What happened to it? A store in Tampa beat your price by over 30% and delivered the same day. Do you want to bid on this?" "Yes, we want to bid. Let me ask the owner and see what he wants to do." I didn't want to hand around, so I said, "Call me back at this number when you have a price. I have things to do." I called the big store in Tampa and was able to get the same salesman. I told him what I wanted, and he said to wait a second to see if he could get a bigger discount. I told him that I would pay for overtime for his people to deliver them this afternoon. The price he gave me was lower per each unit than before, but he said, "You're stripping me of inventory. That's a lot of window fans. Do you have them, and can you deliver them?" "Oh yeah. I'll have them moving toward you in 30 minutes. Watch for a cloud of dust." I laughed and said, "Bring him on." The local guy called back with his bid about 40 minutes after I had hung up from the Tampa store and qualified it with the fact he couldn't deliver that quantity for 10 days. I told him to sharpen his pencil for next time, if there was a next time. I honestly told him, "I made the purchase at about 15% under your price while waiting for you to answer, and they will be delivered in an hour." The guy slammed his phone down, but I heard him say, "The government doesn't move that quick." Who are these people? The fans arrived, were unboxed, and set up in the rooms. We had the two big fans at the doors working when the old sergeant asked me, "Do you have more of those fans we could use on the cooking line?" "That's something we need to get." I told the man, "I'll give you the tall fans from the motor pool shop and the two upstairs in the doorways if you need them. That ought to move some air around for your men." My two guys kept one of the tall fans and took the others to the cooking line. The air was being blown through the line, cooling the cooks down. Everything was working. Our guys began coming in, stashed their gear in the rooms, and were back out smelling the food that was being prepared. The men cooking must have thought they were cooking for a lot more than what was going to be there. They opened a big fly tent with no sides, but with portable picnic tables for everyone to eat when it was time for them to begin serving. I stood back and smiled at how easy it was to resolve all these problems. Shoot, there was a budget that wasn't being used, so where was the money going? I knew my group could use more tools and some upgrades to the shop. We were being brought equipment to repair daily, and I only had 2 men. I needed to look into finding more men. I followed when I saw my sergeant and lieutenant go through the chow line and fill the metal tray with spaghetti, meatballs, delicious sauce, and was given 2 very good rolls. This was something quick for them to make, and it turned out great. I think everyone had their fill, even though some of the really young guys were up for seconds. The cooks ate with us, and then directed how the men should scrape their trays and then brush them off in the soapy boiling water, followed by another boiling water dunk, followed by another dunk in cooler water. A man was dedicated to inspect the trays to make sure they were clean. All the utensils were put into a big basket that was submerged in boiling soapy water and jostled for several minutes. I was amazed to watch how the unit cleaned their equipment up and got ready to begin breakfast. It was closing in on 8, so I said goodnight to all and advised I would be here early. I told my 2 men, "Come in at your regular time, but this is Saturday without overtime pay." We 3 laughed. Tomorrow was going to be fun. I was home, had a piece of pie and glass of milk, and was in bed by 9:30. I was up before 5 and at the post by 5:45. I knew the cooks would be busy and could smell biscuits baking. I walked over to the cooking line, and the old sergeant threw me a biscuit. I took a bite and swooned. "These are some of the best I've had. We are being treated great." The old guy said, "No, we're being treated like more than a bunch of losers who can only cook. We have good clean quarters with fans everywhere. Look at the smiles on my men's faces. They are doing what they like to do and doing it for people who appreciate them. We'll be back for every camp weekend if you want us." He looked around and said, "We made too much food last night. Do you guys have a place for the hungry and homeless to get food? We need to donate that food somewhere it will be used. Find it for me." I went into my office and looked at the phone book for homeless shelters or food providers to the hungry. The one that stood out was the Salvation Army that had a building downtown that served the homeless daily. I called that number and the call was answered even though it was early. I told the person who answered what the problem was, and they became excited. They asked how much food and how many would it feed. I told the lady to hang on and I'd find out. The old sergeant came with me and told me they should have enough spaghetti and meatballs for at least 60 to 70. The woman shrieked and said, "Can you bring it? We have pots to put it in, so bring it and we'll feed it for lunch. We ran out of food yesterday and dipped into today's. Please bring it." I got the address and directions. I asked my guys for a working 4x6 and they handed me some keys. I drove the truck and the cooks loaded 2 giant pots of spaghetti and a huge pot of meatballs and that great sauce. They gave me 6 trays of rolls to go with it. The old Sarge came with me and watched for the streets to turn on. We pulled to the back delivery door of the building and went to bang on the door. A frail-looking woman opened the door and asked, "Are you the fellow who has the food?" She ran back into the kitchen when I nodded and reappeared with a stainless steel rolling cart with 4 big pots and another man to help. We dumped the spaghetti into 2 pots, the meatballs with sauce into 1, and they found a couple of trays for the rolls. The small woman gave the old Sarge a hug and one to me before thanking us again and closing the door. Our activity was already drawing a crowd of homeless. I'm sure they smelled the food as well. We drove back to the post and had coffee while a couple of men washed the big pots we brought back. The Sarge said, "I see loudspeakers. Let's get reveille going. It's time for the slackers to be up." I went for the key to the office hung on the nail by the window and went to the main office. It was just 6:30, so I'm sure the 2 guys normally in the office wouldn't be there yet. I found the PA amp with a record player attached. The 45 RPM record that said reveille should be the one. I remembered how loud the page had been yesterday, so I cranked the volume up a little more and cued the record. Oh boy, was that loud. I turned it down just a little, but let the record completely play through. If that didn't wake them up, nothing would. I looked through the records to find taps and the national anthem. I wondered if we were slacking by not putting the flag up and taking it down daily. I locked the office and went to be first in line for breakfast. The old Sarge said, "You're a good troop to be up and about so early. What's your place here?" It took a bit to explain that I was brought on to manage the motor pool. I told him that we handled the heavy maintenance for this part of the state and needed more people. I advised him that I was looking for guys who wanted the security of the guard but didn't want to go overseas. We were the place to be if he found a guy who wanted to learn how to work on all kinds of vehicles. The guy laughed and said, "You should make a commercial. I'll look for a gearhead who wants to stay here. Can you house someone? And do you have some place for a single to eat?" I told him, "I'm sure we do. And yes, we have great barracks that is even scheduled to have a TV in the day room." We ate a good breakfast, and the men from the barracks were coming out dressed for activity. We were going to have some fun. I had everyone stay seated with breakfast finished, and I began telling them the theory of what we wanted to accomplish this weekend. Each person needed to be proficient in each vehicle. I told them they would make mistakes, but that was expected. They were learning and would be more proficient if they were called up. I told them about the course and how it might give some a tumble if they made a mistake in the smaller vehicles. All had to have their pots on with eye protection, driving gloves, and wearing a seatbelt wasn't just required, it was an order. Look at me, a single stripe telling these other men with a hell of a lot more stripes than me that this was an order. I told all, we will use a small vehicle over the obstacle course and a large vehicle over the proficiency course. One of the maneuvers they needed to do with the large vehicle is to back it to a loading dock and to not damage the dock or truck. We had 2 docks built that were just 4x4s with a 4x4 to back up to. That was as good as I could do without damaging a vehicle. Volunteers went first. The old Jeep that was being phased out, the M38A1, was the easiest, but it also lulled people into some unworthy self-confidence. The people doing the bigger trucks began with the 4x6 or 3/4 ton. We had all the canvas off the trucks for better visibility. The party had started. The guy driving the older Jeep got it up on 2 wheels on the berm and was probably going to pee his pants, but it came down and finished his run. The next guy tightened his helmet and made sure his seatbelt was secure. He didn't need it because he paid attention and didn't try to take too steep an angle on the berm. Each man drove a truck and Jeep one at a time. We were about a third of the way through by 11 o'clock or lunchtime. Everyone enjoyed having a decent lunch of sandwiches on homemade bread. There were cold cuts, cheese, peanut butter, and jelly, just like home. There were 2 types of soup for those who enjoyed a hot meal. There was hardly any soup left when we finished. I went back over what our objective was and what we would be doing before we began again. I noticed I was getting most of the men from the Cook Squadron queued up to drive the courses while the afternoon wore on. They mostly wanted to drive the heavy vehicles, but that's what they drove. My 2 men were constantly resurrecting the 4x4s for the shipping dock. I called a halt at 4 and told the men to refuel the trucks, check the oil, and park them for tomorrow. I went over who had driven the trucks and which ones. We had a couple of rollovers in the new Jeep, but no injuries or damage. I told all that I would have a list of what trucks each man still had to drive by morning. My lieutenant and sergeant finally showed their faces for the first time since lunch. I was a little miffed as my 2 guys were my big help today, while those 2 office heroes didn't do shit all day. I guess they could get away with it because they were regulars and outranked me, and I was a green regular just learning. This was going to be a long 4 years. The relationships we were building with some other posts made it possible for us to host weekends for them. They would join us with what we were doing, but we had the Cook Squad as a constant to get us fed. Everyone profited because we were able to help them with their camp weekends, and they helped with mine. I had to hold my tongue by early November and not laugh at Jeannie as she waddled around. We had everything arranged to where we would go for the berth and the car seat we would use to get home. The nice Ford had seat belts to hold the new style infant and car seat. Jeannie said she felt really strange and thought we might want to head toward the hospital on the morning of November 15. Mom called Bev, who instantly showed up with Clint dancing around. I sanely drove to Melbourne, trying to avoid all the bumps in the road I knew so well. I checked Jeannie in and gave them all my service information. The first doctor who examined Jeannie said she was going to have the baby, but it would be a while. I told all that I was going to run to the post and advise everyone I would be out a couple of days. It shouldn't be a problem because we were just past a camp weekend and a few weeks from the next. The lieutenant was acting all military and said that I had to suck it up and be at my post. I asked, how about a week's leave? I have at least that much available. The a-hole said, I don't have to grant that, you know. Did I forget to say please, sir? My wife is having a baby. I was here before the bell rang, just like always, but I'm asking for a little time to be with my wife while she's going through this. Please reconsider and let me have leave. The sergeant recruiter was standing at the door with a puzzled look. He even butted in, what's the problem? The motor pool, which is the only thing you command, is operating so efficiently that you're being commended on it. Come on, Lieutenant, lighten up. The man has never been late, works 7 days a week when we have a camp weekend, and has put driving schools on twice." The lieutenant grunted and threw something at his waist before saying, "Get out of here. You have a pass until a week from today." I gave a quick thank you and got the hell out of there. The recruiting sergeant was ahead of me and followed me out the door. He said, "I think he's having wife trouble. You know he doesn't make that much, and I think his wife thinks he should be making more. He was passed over for captain, but then he doesn't have a lot of trophies to show. You've done more for him than he's done for himself. Get out of here, and I hope it's a boy." Mom and Bev were in the waiting room when I went back to the hospital. Mom said the doctor told her a few minutes ago that it would be soon. It's too bad I couldn't be with her when the baby came. This was exciting. A gown-covered nurse stuck her head out and said, "It's a girl. You'll be able to see both in a few minutes." I said to the two women, "Our little Julia is here." I think we both wanted a little girl so that we could name her Julia. Both women gave me kisses and hugs. We settled down for a while until Mom suggested, "Go use the pay phone and see if your dad answers. He'll go tell Clint." I went to the pay phone and was prepared with a pocket full of quarters. I made the call, and my friend Shirley was now on day shifts. I told her, "It's a girl, and I now have to tell the grandpas. Connect me to the farm." Shirley rang the phone twice before my dad answered with a, "Is it here?" "It's a girl, Dad. I haven't seen her yet, but she'll be beautiful just like her mother. Tell Clint, okay? He's right here. We've been waiting for your call. I think we need to drive in to see this new baby. I'll watch for you too. Come on so you can see them together." A nurse was about to lead Mom and Bev out when I came back to the waiting room. I followed, although not invited. Jeannie was lying in the bed, sort of sitting up. She had the most serene smile on her face. She smiled at me and held her arms up to me. I gently hugged and kissed her, softly saying, "You brought us all a little Julia." She told the two women that the doctor couldn't get over how red the baby's hair was and that it was too early for them, but she had thousands of freckles everywhere. I told the doctor that's what hooked my husband. A nurse wheeled the baby in and said we would have to leave because Jeannie was going to try to feed her. Jeannie said, "Oh, come on. We're farmers, and we're not bashful about nursing. It's natural and necessary. Little Julia will be happy her daddy was with us when she finds out he was here for her first meal." The nurse obviously wasn't used to people being so open, but it was true. We were just a lot more natural about some things. The nurse was going to take the rolling bassinet to the nursery when the feeding was complete, and Julia was burped. Jeannie asked, "Can we keep her for a while? We'll call you if she acts like she's in trouble in any way." The nurse shrugged her shoulders and left the room. I suggested that either Mom or Bev go down to guide Dad and Clint up to the room. I checked on Jeannie and pulled her gown back together. She was happily dozing. Little Julia was sound asleep, not minding the bustling around everyone was doing. A nurse came in and expressed some milk from Jeannie onto a microscope slide and left. I pulled her gown back together again. The two men we called Dad came in with Mom. Both of them stared at Jeannie and then went to stand over Julia. It was an emotional moment for the two men, as another generation had begun. June still wasn't pregnant, and Sarah was a few months away. I thought about how this all started on Valentine's Day those 4 years ago in bed alone at home that night. I needed to go talk to Julia, but I'm sure she's watching and listening, and knows that we have a little Julia. God works in mysterious ways. It was back to the salt mines 3 days later. I was at the office starched and pressed with shined shoes. I told the sergeant that I was working on something that could cause some problems, but could get the lieutenant those captain's bars. I found a bunch of overcharges, improper service charges, overblown delivery fees, and more. I want to have it sent to the Florida IG's office and on up from there. I have the report complete. I just need to show it to the lieutenant and explain it so that he can write a cover letter. It's on my desk, so I'm going to go get it now and let him read it when he comes in. The sergeant frowned, but I'm sure it was because our officer had been in such a bad mood lately. I walked out the back door and remembered the baby's picture I wanted to show my two guys. I went around the corner of the building and was slammed by a car hard enough to throw me over 20 feet. My two guys came running and told me to lie still until an ambulance came. I was in shock and wondering how bad I was hurt. A very drunk lieutenant staggered from his car and stood over me. "What the hell are you doing walking in the parking area?" I couldn't answer him because I hurt too bad. Now what was I going to do? A brand new baby, and I'm all screwed up with something that may be broken. A city policeman and an ambulance arrived. The medic placed me on a board and loaded me into the ambulance. They rushed me to the hospital, and I was immediately taken into surgery. A man placed a mask over my nose and mouth, and I watched him as everything faded to black. When I woke up, my mom was sitting beside me. I lifted one arm, noticing medical equipment attached to it, then the other. My shoulder and chest ached. Both my legs hurt too, so I lifted my head slightly and saw my feet and toes, but also a lot of cast on both legs. At least I still had all my limbs. Mom leaned in and said, "Welcome back, son. I'm so glad you woke up. We were all worried." Jeannie will be thrilled, and maybe now Julia can stop being so nervous. I tried to tell Mom to call Jeannie, but all that came out was a croak. Mom left and quickly returned with crushed ice. "Drink or chew this if you can," she said. "Your throat's dry." I crunched the ice, then managed to say, "Go call Jeannie and tell her I'm going to be fine and out of here soon." Mom said, "The doctors may not want to let you out so fast. Let me call Jeannie. Bev is probably over there with her." Mom came in a few minutes later and said, "It helped for them to know that you're awake." A doctor came in and said, "So you've rejoined the living. You were out for a couple of days after taking a hard hit. We'll need to do more work on your right knee and leg, but you're not going to lose it. Your left leg is broken, but it will heal. You also have several broken ribs, a deep cut on the back of your head, and a concussion. You're in rough shape, but fixing people like you is what I do best. Here's what you need to do. Eat everything we bring you, drink your fluids, and stay in bed. We'll get more x-rays, and then make a plan for treatment. Don't worry if family isn't around. We'll have an aide help you with meals and anything else you need. For now, it's crucial that you stay still. Once you're stronger, we'll work on freeing up your arms so you can hold a book or turn pages. Be patient, and we'll get you back on your feet." Mom told me she had called my guard unit to let them know I was awake. She said a sergeant would visit soon. I smiled and told her I was tired and drifted off to sleep. I dreamed of the people I loved and the comforting memories of holding my daughter. Good and bad moments flooded my mind. When I woke up, the room was dim but not dark. I pressed the call button for some water. The aide pointed to the clock when I asked for the time. I said, "It would be easier if it were a 24-hour clock. That way I'd know it's really 2300 when it says 11 o'clock. She laughed and said, "It's night, yes." I asked how long ago my mom had left, and she replied, "Around 8. I just came on shift." Feeling a little hungry, I asked if I could eat. She smiled and said she'd bring me some soup. Later, when she returned, she helped me eat slowly. After finishing the soup, I asked if I could have some pudding. She offered several flavors, and I chose butterscotch first. She patiently fed me, making sure I could enjoy the food and swallow carefully. Afterward, she said, "You'll probably be tired now, but each time you wake up, you'll stay up a little longer." She mentioned ordering a soft breakfast, cream of wheat or oatmeal, some fruit, and scrambled eggs, something easy to start regaining my strength. The aide was right. I was tired and laid back and was out again, but without any dreams. I was awake when another aide showed up with a washcloth and a bowl of water. She washed my face and neck and promised to wash more as she was allowed. After drying me, she said, "Breakfast is here, so let me get it so I can feed it to you." The tray had a cup of coffee, but there's no way to get it without spilling. I told the aide to use the straw that was for the juice or milk so I could have a sip of coffee. I had a couple of sips of weak coffee, and she then began slowly feeding me. I ate all the cream of wheat, and then wanted the eggs before the fruit. The fruit was a slice of peach and a slice of pear. I ate both and drank my milk and the juice. I asked for another sip of coffee, and that was all I needed. I could feel a presence at the door and wanted to turn that way. The aide told me lay still and not to move. My sergeant came to sit by the bed and said, "I think we've lost you from the unit. We have a new officer who is a nice guy, but a little slow. We haven't been able to get someone to fill your shoes yet." He sat there a minute and said, "You probably have a service-connected disability. Uncle Sam is going to have to take care of you from now on. It won't be much, but it will be something. There will be someone from the state to talk to you about the accident, but you're not going to be able to tell them much." The lieutenant was put under arrest and taken away by someone from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. I'm told he's going to get a court-martial, probably some jail time, and kicked out. He shouldn't have come to work drunk. He talked about how I had set up the camp weekends so that everyone enjoyed them more. The big deal was the cooks didn't have to sleep on cots. Bunks were the ticket. He said, "I just wanted to stop by and warn you that you are going to be out of the service now and paid about what you get now, which is about 50 cents an hour for 40 hours. Tell the guys thanks for helping me get the place into shape." The sarge left, and a guy came in and mounted a swivel platform on the wall. He brought in a TV next and made the connections. He brought me a remote and wanted to hand it to me, but I said, "Put it by my hand. I'm not supposed to move." He showed me how the remote worked for off and on, volume up and down, and the channels to go up and down. He explained the channels available through their giant antennae on top of hospital. There were 10 VHF regular and 6 more on the UHF frequency. He turned it on and found the local channel and adjusted the volume to a low level that I could hear, but it wouldn't be too loud for others. I asked who's paying for this. The man looked at his work order and said, "Someone named Blake." That shocked me enough that I almost sat straight up. The pain from moving was enough to keep me still. How or why would she do this? I lay there thinking how nice she had been to me in the past and really wasn't a part of anything her husband or family did. It's too bad that she felt she had to try to atone for his bad actions. The program on the TV was some kind of women's show, so I found the remote and pushed the down button. I went through the channels and found another women's program. I went through the channels going up and discovered some kind of channel that sold things on the air. It seemed silly to me. I had to push the up button twice to get to the higher frequency when I reached the end of that group. I moved from channel to channel and found women's talk shows and still no news. I finally found an old Hopalong Cassidy movie that I watched. All that excitement put me to sleep. I woke for lunch with the TV still on. The station had changed and was some form of news program that covered world news. The aide sitting next to me said her family had a TV, so she would write down the stations and where they were from. She said the programming stayed the same most of the time, but the good evening TV didn't start until 7. I had lunch and Mrs. Blake came in the room just as I was relaxing. She came over and leaned down to kiss me on the forehead. She said she had to come to encourage me to get better and to let me know that I had a future regardless of how I came out of this. Why did you rent the TV for me, ma'am? So much in your life has been made bad by someone in my and Morgan's families, Thomas. It all began with those boys attacking Sarah right up until you getting hurt. Everything is because of the start of all this. You lost Julia, but married Jean, and then it looked like all was going well, but Morgan was using his position on the draft board to help family boys and their friends not to go to war. He wanted to sell the elevator to you, but his family thought they could put something in the deal that would hurt you, your family, and the Kennedys. You quit and joined the National Guard to stay near Jean, but now you were hurt anyway, and it's back to what my family began. You would have married Julia, had a baby right away, and would have been exempt from the draft. None of this would have ever happened. Now I've lost Morgan and have had to hire men from other parts of the country to run the elevator, but it's still running. Just think of the TV as something you earned managing the mill and elevator. Get well, and we'll see if you can still work. Mrs. Blake gave me all the local gossip and told me to call when I could. She knew there were no phones in the rooms, but also knew that I wouldn't be in bed forever. I didn't stay asleep long and was startled into waking by hearing Jeannie's voice and some baby noises. Mom, Bev, and Jeannie were there with the baby. Jeannie held the baby near me so I could talk to her. The little one seemed to enjoy me talking to her, but wanted a more comfortable position. Julia sat in the chair near the bed after kissing my forehead. She held the baby on her lap in a sort of sitting position. We talked about what was happening at home and how her siblings were doing. I could tell she was right on the edge of crying, so I told her, Jeannie, my love, God will not let our love go unrecognized. He's given us our baby, and we'll have more in the future. I will recover, and I'll be a farmer once again. Stay strong for our baby and for you. I know you can't come to visit often, but come when you can. I'm surprised they let the baby in here. Mom said she had permission from the doctor as this was probably good for my attitude. Bev asked if I liked the TV. I told her that I really hadn't watched anything of much interest yet. Jeannie asked, can I see it? We don't have a TV either. I turned the TV on, and it immediately showed a cooking program. The three women were spellbound by seeing people on the screen and hearing them talk. Mom smiled at me because she knew I wouldn't be watching a cooking program for entertainment. Who knows? Maybe I should learn more about cooking. Jeannie's attention came back to me because Julia had leaned forward and was touching my hand. She had a grip on a finger and didn't want to let go. I told Jeannie that it didn't hurt, and it was good to feel and hear our baby. The doctor came in and told all of us, we've been able to study all the x-rays and make a plan. Tom's chest is healing properly and will continue if he is patient and doesn't move. We've made a plan, and we're going to work on Tom's leg tomorrow morning. He shouldn't be in any more pain than he is now, and we have been trying to use fewer narcotics so far. We don't want him to become addicted to them. Tom could be up doing therapy within 2 months if tomorrow is successful the way we think it will be. He's going to have to remain here during that time, but he should be able to be put into a wheelchair and get around a little on his own in another 4 or 5 weeks. Please come to visit him when you can, as it is what will keep Tom a sane person while he heals. Do any of you have any questions? Jeannie asked if I would have many or any physical limitations. The doctor answered, it depends on how the surgery comes out tomorrow. I think I can put Humpty Dumpty back together again. That gave us all a smile as he excused himself and left. I had shut the TV off when he came in so that it was quiet except for the cooing Julia was doing while still holding my finger and trying to pull it to her mouth. Jeannie said, you need a shave. Do the aides do that for you? I can get the stuff and shave you if you want. Bev said, Tom has so many bandages everywhere that we should probably let them do it. Jeannie nodded and leaned over to kiss me again, but she kissed me on the lips and smiled this time. Julia was becoming squirmy and was beginning to make noise, so the women said they should probably leave. I hated for them to leave, but I also knew they weren't comfortable with the baby there. They each gave me a kiss on the forehead, and Jeannie gave me a lip kiss again. It was sad to see them go, but I hated for people to see me this way. I was going to get well. It will happen. The operation the next day must have been successful since the doctor had my leg and knee in a heavier cast. He came in the day after the surgery and said, "Your knee and leg look like we put zippers in them, but I think only your natural parts are in there. You have to remain very still for a couple of weeks as the pieces knit back together. I'm not saying you'll be able to run a 100-yard dash, but you're going to be mobile and able to do most things. Just stay still. I'll have you in a wheelchair in a couple of weeks." Those weeks were torture, and I couldn't do anything but watch TV or sleep. An aide came in with a book once and read about 20 pages before she left the book on the bedside table. It lay there until the day I was released. It was a few weeks later that I was able to sit up in bed and begin to use my arms. The doctor had all the casts off and was having a physical therapist move my legs around about 2 months after my accident. The damaged knee was slowly moved while the doctor was feeling all around it. There was surprisingly little pain from the knee. We continuously did the leg moving therapy every 2 hours until the doctor came in one morning and began moving things away from the bed. The man said, "Let's go for a test drive. Your muscles have atrophied, but you'll recover them. It will be slow, but I know you'll be active. I hate to say this, but you won't be going back to being a soldier. I've shared everything we've done with the Army, and they say you are 100% disabled from a service-connected injury. You are probably already under a disability retirement. The good news is that the Army is paying for all your expenses while you're here. Now let's try to walk." 2 nurses came and assisted me in getting up and shakily standing. The doctor watched me and my leg to see if the knee would give out. I was asked to take a step and did, and then I did the next step using the bad leg to hold my weight. I walked about 10 steps from the bed and 10 steps back. I turned around and sat on the bed. Phew, that was work. I looked at the doc and smiled. "You did it. You said you could put a mess back together, and you did. Is my chest the way it should be, or is there something I should worry about? You did your part by lying still for so long. That was crucial, and you listened. I want to keep you another week so you can become used to moving around. Since your bedroom at home is upstairs, the physical therapist has some stairs for you to go up and down. Do a lot of those as they will restore your muscles. You'll be on a heavy protein diet for muscle, and just a heavy diet to gain some weight back. A real bonus will be that you can use the bathroom instead of the urinal and bedpan, and you can take an assisted shower. I'm going to have a specialist come in to give you some cognitive tests to make sure you didn't lose any of your normal thinking abilities. We'll do another full body series of x-rays to have a good basis for the results of the surgery. I want you to be my patient after you leave here, and let me check you a couple times a year. Now eat a big lunch, and I'll write some orders up for you. Now's the time when I wish that I had a room full of those I want around me. Jeannie could help me with an assisted shower. I wonder how that was going to work. I ate and lay back to relax and fell asleep. Mom, Dad, Clint, Bev, and Jeannie holding Julia were all standing in the room watching me. I sat up with my legs off the bed and Jeannie said, "The doctor called and said we should come to see you do something. Let's see you do this, do something thing." I waved for Dad to come close and I held onto his arm while getting into a standing position. I slowly walked around the bed to where Jeannie was with Julia and hugged the two. Jeannie had tears streaming down her face as she said, "You're going to be okay, aren't you?" I walked to Mom, hugged her, and to Bev and did the same, then shook Clint's hand and did the same to Dad. Poor Dad was hovering by me in case I should fall. I turned back to Jeannie and hugged her again, sat on my bed, and held my hands out for Julia. I held my baby to me and realized how much she had grown since being born. She was already almost 5 months old. My kid was active and wanted to look at and touch everything. The doctor chose that moment to come in. He asked, "Has he been showing you what he can do?" He surprised me this morning and did far better than I could have expected. He explained everything to them as he had me, and told all of them I would be able to go home in about a week. Jeannie sat on the bed with me and asked the doctor, "Do you think everything else will work? We want more children." The doctor laughed and said, "Tom's shown evidence everything is in working order since he's been off narcotics. Enjoy each other when he gets home." When the doc left, Dad said, "A man from the Defense Department came by thinking you would be home. Since you weren't, he explained that you were medically retired and what benefits you would have. You do receive VA medical, but he didn't say anything about if Jeannie or Julia are covered. He told me that you would have to go before several doctors to determine your fitness if you felt you could serve again. You'll not have to worry about going to Asia. I had watched the news and knew a lot of boys and men were being injured and dying over there. We visited until my supper was brought. It looked like a lot, and it actually had a lot of chicken on the plate. The group said they should go home now, and some would try to come back tomorrow. I told them all, "You can come and help me walk around the ward to gain my strength back. I'll be home soon." Jeannie came by herself the next day. She said Julia was being smothered by the 2 grandmas. Jeannie walked around the ward with me until the girl from physical therapy came for me. Jeannie came with us as we went to a room with equipment to help people walk and gain other motor skills. My main thing in there was walking across the room unassisted and then going up and down 5 steps to and from a platform. I asked the therapist if I could have slippers so my feet wouldn't be cold. She gasped, put her hand over her mouth, and told us she would be right back. She returned with a pair of rubber-soled slippers. They gave me more confidence because I didn't have to worry about my feet slipping on the slick floor. Jeannie went to get a sandwich and a canned Coke, then brought it back to eat with me. After I finished my lunch, I asked the aide if my wife could assist me with a shower. The aide chuckled and said, "I was wondering when you'd want a shower. I'm happy she's here to help." With Jeannie's assistance, I was able to take a proper shower, including washing my hair, which had become quite overdue for a trim. Jeannie made sure to adjust her clothes to keep them dry and took care to make sure I was fully cleaned. It felt incredible to be completely clean again. I shaved, brushed my teeth, and then checked my reflection in the mirror. Scars marked the left side of my face, evidence of the injury to my ear. Another scar above my hairline showed where my scalp had been exposed, and a long scar along my neck appeared to be from shattered glass. Once we were both dressed, we took a walk around the hospital floor, me in my new slippers. I even climbed partway up the stairs and back down. I told Jeannie, "Getting to bed will be no problem." Jeannie smiled and said, "We were concerned we might need to set up a bed downstairs. I'm glad you're moving so well." Jeannie had to leave to take care of Julia. I told her how much it meant to me that she came. We shared a long hug, just as an aide walked by to check on me, catching us in the moment. We both laughed and admitted we were just happy to be together. This week went by slow but fast, if that's possible. I think the doctor ran every test there was to be sure I was going to be okay. The day came in the last days of January when I dressed in some of my own clothes and was wheeled out of the hospital in a wheelchair before getting into the Kennedy station wagon. Jeannie and I sat in the middle seat with Julia between us. Mom and Dad were in the back. I knew this was a milestone in my life and had only a bright future to look forward to. I was mobbed at home and nosed by the 2 dogs that were always faithful. I walked out to look in the pasture and saw the usual cow, a steer, and a younger steer grazing. There was a calf following the cow, and Dad explained that the calf was probably the cow's replacement as she was getting old. We went into the house where the women went to work making a big lunch. We ate and Jeannie asked if I was tired and needed a nap. I've been taking too many naps and don't need that much sleep, or at least I don't think so. I'll lay down with Julia when it's time for her nap. I want to hold my kid some more. After the nap that included Jeannie, as well as Julia between us, I sat at Dad's desk and opened mail that had gathered. My income tax stuff was there, so I separated it and put it aside. It should be fairly easy. There was a letter from the draft board that said my deferment as head of household had been denied, and I should expect a notice soon. It didn't happen, and it will never happen now. There were some insurance bills that needed to be paid, so I looked in my checkbook register to see the less than $100 a month from the National Guard, and I was receiving some kind of monthly payment of $200. I dug through the rest of the mail and discovered my lawyer sued the lieutenant who hit me in civil court and won a settlement of an annuity that would pay me $200 a month for life. The lieutenant came from a very wealthy family. If this had waited till after my 21st birthday, I would have had to agree to the suit and the settlement. But as it was, my folks could take care of it, and I was just as glad. We had money to help with the household and farm bills. Dad didn't have to keep supporting me for life. I showed Dad this, and he smiled. He knew what had happened as he was the one to sic the attorney on the lieutenant. That's one more thing I don't have to fret over right away. Jeannie had been keeping the checkbook up, so she also knew this. This was the slower time of year for farmers here in Florida where the strawberries are all picked and the groves should be empty and in good shape by now. You would run a tractor with a disc between the trees to help aerate the soil. Dad took me on a tour to show me how everything was. Some field workers were getting an area ready for vegetables and another for potato and onion planting. This was a good working farm, and as Dad's son, I was going to continue making the farm work. I spent 2 days working up a field that should be good for melons and/or pumpkins and sweet corn. Dad said he had cleared another 200 acres for sweet corn as the canning company was going to pay for the seed and then pick and buy the corn from us in the field. We had to plant and cultivate it, but the bird's eye people took over after that. Sounded like easy money to me. Dad said he wanted to clear another 200 acres to sell even more next year. He said he didn't want to give up his other produce crops for sweet corn. He said he had updated his usual 5-year plan again and said for me to review it. After I looked at his plan, I asked, "What's this about livestock? Are you planning on doing more with that?" Dad smiled and said, "Well, if my son joins me on the farm, I plan on taking over those other 4 sections to the west and using all that for cattle. We could probably raise about 1,000 head and sell those that are ready when Griffin has his auction every year. He welcomes other farmers to join with him as it brings more buyers." Do you know that he even has a rail spur to his auction area and another to his groves? His son is now starting a fertilizer business because he says the big companies are assaulting us on prices. Those people keep getting bigger and bigger. I looked at the calendar and realized Jeannie and I were nearing our wedding anniversary. I was so proud of Jeannie and how she had handled herself this last year or so. I wanted it to be special. I went to Melbourne in my old pickup and bought Jeannie a bracelet similar to an ID bracelet that was popular. I had it specially engraved. I found the right chocolates and went to Walgreens for some cards. I hid the gift, cards, and chocolates back home. I asked Jeannie if she would like to go to the Valentine's Day dance, and she said she might if her sister would babysit Julia. She would enjoy spending our anniversary night together if not. There was no big rush to go to the store to get a dress or shoes. I knew Mom and Dad were going with the Kennedys, so they were taken care of. Jeannie said, "Let's stay home and just be a family on the eve of the 13th. We can always go out if we want. I just don't want to go to the dance that started a lot of trouble in our lives, but it did offer us a great way to celebrate our wedding. I think I would still rather be home." I gave Jeannie an anniversary card and then a Valentine on Valentine's Day morning. I handed out the other Valentines to Mom and Bev and Jeannie's little now big little sister after breakfast. I left a small box of chocolates for all the kids and then gave Mom and Jeannie a box of chocolates. We waited for the folks to leave for the night, finished with the kitchen, and we're going to turn Dad's new TV on, but it never happened. Jeannie had the radio on one of the soft music stations so we could cuddle with Julia wiggling and crawling around our feet. I had just kissed Jeannie when she whispered to me, "We're going to have another baby." I must have been very ripe when we had our first fun upstairs when you came home. Is this a good time? I was overcome with emotion as this was proof of God's desire to keep me alive and to make all our family's lives good again. We kissed and kissed until we picked Julia up to be with us. I went for Jeannie's gift when we took a break to change Julia. She put Julia back between us, and I gave her the bracelet. It said, "Happy Anniversary" on the top left corner and said, "Happy Valentine's Day" on the bottom right corner, with Jean in large bold script in the center. Jeannie kissed me for the special gift. I kissed her and said there is more, so she opened the top of the bracelet to find more engraving. It said simply, "Let's be Valentines forever." Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.